Faith is resistance.
Hi, my name is James Roguski, and the purpose of this video is to encourage everyone on planet Earth to speak out publicly and express your opinion in regards to what the WHO is currently doing and what they have done about the proposed pandemic treaty, which is currently being negotiated in secret. Over 300 amendments to the existing international health regulations, which is also currently being negotiated in secret. Please speak out about the amendments that were adopted last year and only have about 6 months left to reject them.
Implementing the amended IHR shall enable member states to detect, prevent, and respond to public health emergencies and reduce the chance of pandemics. The world, however, requires a different level of legal mandates, such as the pandemic treaty, to navigate through a particular pandemic, should one occur, and it will. Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
I have explained in great detail on various articles on my Substack, jamesroguski.substack.com. Now is the time for you to speak up to the delegates who will be meeting throughout the remainder of 2023 and into 2024. These negotiations should be stopped because of the crimes and the mistakes that have been made over the last 4 years. Call me directly, 310-619-3055. Please share this video and share this website. Speak up now or forever hold your peace.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Armor of Truth Live number 238. To start off with, how often is it that someone tells you to give them a call? Like, we've got solutions, but go ahead and give me a call. We've got James Roguski here with us today. Let me go ahead and set us up for what we're going to be talking about today. A lot of you already know what it is that we're discussing here, but specifically right now, or it's just ended, the 76th World Health Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, where over 190 nations came together, member states of the World Health Organization. They're making fundamental changes to the way they've always operated. They're negotiating your freedom, James is going to help us with the details of this, but they're negotiating your life. And they're doing it in secret under this thing that the news is calling a pandemic treaty. It's a little more complicated than that. But there's another side of this where proposed amendments have come up that are shocking when you see what they are. Those are to the international health regulations. So there's two different things going on here. We need to understand what each of these is and what are the three biggest points. What we want you to come away with today is knowing how you can respond, what you can do about it, because this is not just where we come in for truth or cotton candy, right? This is going to be about action. Christians are not meant to be passive in the world, and our message here to you always is the same. We take action. And having said that, let's go ahead and let's bring in here's James Roguski. Welcome, James, to the show. If you wouldn't mind, we were talking beforehand here about how it is that you came into this topic, and as far as I can tell, as far as Summer and I can tell, you can tell me if you've seen anyone that's more prepared. That
no,
seem to
I've
be
not.
An expert on this topic and someone that's very important and valuable to us right now. Tell us how it is that you came into one day decided to make this your purpose for now.
I'd be happy to do that, but before I do that, let me just kind of give a structure. If we could do this, it would be awesome, because you guys are fantastic in that we're going to take some time to really get into this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think there's maybe 5 or 6 segments. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll talk a little bit about how I got into it. It's not about me, but I really want to talk about the history. Like, how did this whole thing really get started? Because what we really want to get to is the last segment, which is here's the action that we want you to take. But I'm not going to take any action unless I know why. And I wouldn't expect anybody else to do that as well. And so there's, the history of what got us into this mess, what happened last year, what's happening right now, and what different pieces of the puzzle are going on, and what we want people to potentially help us do in the future to get ourselves out of this pickle. And so if we can try to compartmentalize what we talk about, because the problem has been people are all over the place talking about all kinds of different pieces of the puzzle. It gets all mixed up. And then when people listen to that, they regurgitate and repeat the thing that got all mixed up. So ideally, I know it's hard, but if we could, just try to pick an aspect of this and stick to it for a good period of time.
Yeah.
And, I may be just as guilty because there's just so much going on. So the way I got into this, I'm 63 years old, and I was born in Ohio, spent my childhood there till I was 18, went to school in Rhode Island, and then I ended up moving to California. And so I've done a number of things in my life, and one of the most pertinent aspects of it was from 1996, for about 15 years, I was the manager and the buyer for a number of mom and pop nutrition stores, herbs and nutrition and homeopathy and so forth. And so I have 15 years of just digging in to learn as much as I possibly could. And, from the time I was 19 years old until now, I have never gone to a medical doctor. And you couldn't pay me to take an aspirin. So I'm like the natural anti-pharmaceutical. This system is disgusting to me. And I've spoken out about it. I wrote a book 16 years ago, Your Doctor is a Liar. Everybody can download the book for free. Just go to yourdoctorisaliar.com and download the ebook version. It's the lies about cholesterol started before I was born, and people still haven't awakened to it. So, we've dealt with a lot of lies in our country, in our world, and, that's just one of them. And so I've gotten to be pretty good at seeing through the BS. And if I step in some BS, I'm going to tell people not to step in it, right? Don't, avoid that problem. So over the past 3.5 or so years, I had built up 6 separate websites dedicated to all the things that were going on crazy related to health. And the story that I related to you before we started recording was in January of last year, I did something that I have done in the past, and it's been amazing and very inspiring and has guided my life. I was working in my little yard in Los Angeles area here. I have a tiny little yard, but I planted a bunch of fruit trees. So I have a little bit of a food forest, literally, right? And I was working out there, and it was a nice day, and I looked up to the sky, and I said, God, I volunteer. Tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it. And I've done that in the past, and sometimes, boom, you get an idea, and you're like, oh, okay. But this one didn't happen instantaneously. About a month went by, and I got an email from my internet hosting provider. I had a number of websites, and they were all going away. And I reached out and said, why? And they said, not going to tell you, just going away. And so I was kind of happy with myself that I didn't freak out. I didn't get angry. I was like, okay, there's a plan. I don't know what's next, but that door is closing. Time for a personal, great reset. What am I going to do next? And so I ended up on Substack, jamesroguski.substack.com. The first article that I did was explaining what I just explained to you. And then the second article was about a doctor in South Africa, Dr. Shankara Chetty, who back in, I think, September of 2020, published an article about how he was saving everybody's life. I mean, he had over 10,000 patients, and not one of them went to the hospital. Like, what do you know that everybody else probably ought to know?
Imagine that here in the West.
Okay. And so, I encourage everybody to go to the bottom of the archives on my Substack and learn what has been hidden from you. It's astonishing. And so I did a couple of more things. And then I learned about a talk about the pandemic treaty. Well, at the time, it did not exist. it was a bunch of proposals, many proposals from organizations that have tons of money, and they're putting out document after document pushing for a treaty. And I'm like, what the heck is going on here? This was, a year and a half almost ago. Well, a little more than a year. So I wrote a monstrous article with all of these proposals about the proposed pandemic treaty. And the next day, I said, well, they're making all these proposals. What the heck? I'll kick in mine. So I wrote the People's Treaty. So you can go to thepeoplestreaty.com and see my response to all these proposals. And so, okay, I think I'm done with that. 3 days later, on March 29th, I get dragged out of bed by some compulsion to go search the internet. Well, what more did I need to know? I just published all this stuff. And I find this article, and it said, oh, we've obtained this document. Click here. And I did, and downloaded the document, started reading it. And that's when the lightning bolt hit me. I saw what that was, and I'm feeling the same tingle right now. It's like, okay, this looks like the assignment that I asked for. I think this is something I could work with. This is something that I have the capacity to share, right? Because it's important. So on March 31st, like 3 days later, I wrote an article, Wake Up and Smell the Burning of Our Constitution. And so now we're going to be getting into the details that I want to segment. And so love to see your pretty face so we can have a nice little conversation going back and forth. It's not just about me, but that's how I got into this. I volunteered, and on March 28th, I found the portal to the WHO rabbit hole, and I haven't been able to climb my way out since. There's all kinds of rabbit turds down here. Everything that the WHO puts out is interesting. And so what I would like to do is talk about what happened last year from the moment that I learned about this till pretty much this time. Oh boy, interestingly enough, the article that I published a year ago today, if memory serves me, was I am so pissed. Okay. So if we could segment this off from the beginning of my little venture down the rabbit hole to a year ago today, that would be awesome. Okay.
That's fine. And we can take our time with it. I've got some elements of history that I'll, about specifically about Agenda 21. This didn't start 3 years ago, right? This has been in, and I think a lot of people who watch this channel know this, but hopefully, prayerfully, we'll get some new eyes and ears here to understand that this is a plan that's been in action for a long time. So yeah, go ahead and take off of that, and we'll keep. Let
me maybe go back in time to the Civil War.
Yeah,
right?
let's.
Imagine there were no automobiles, and you had a horse if you wanted to travel. And imagine living in a city where there's horse crap all over the place. Okay, that's not a sanitary situation. Okay. Imagine living in London or Paris or some other, New York City or whatever. You didn't have indoor plumbing. You had a chamber pot, and if you had to relieve yourself, you went in the chamber pot, and every now and then you'd throw it out in the yard or throw it out in the street or in the gutter, whatever. And that had to be disgusting. And so there were sanitary regulations that I believe started in France, where, and then indoor plumbing, started to be a thing. And you can see the progression of just sanitation. Just, when they started building automobiles, this is maybe a stretch, but I think that automobiles replacing horses for transportation improved sanitation. It might have polluted the air, but you weren't stepping through horse dung. Okay. And so the regulations on sanitation and indoor plumbing did a lot to make the rates of disease, of contagious, pathogen-caused diseases, dropped dramatically, certainly into World War II. And then they started jabbing people and gave credit for the decrease in rates of
Now, is this
communicable
smallpox?
diseases.
Was this the smallpox?
Pick whatever ailment you want.
Just so happens that at the same time, people started washing their hands.
and not stepping in and stuff, and indoor plumbing. I mean, you could wash your hands because you had indoor plumbing. You didn't have to go to the river and wash your hands. Okay, and so in that time frame after World War II, here's really where I think the problem started. Most people will talk about a treaty that got us into the WHO, but it wasn't technically really a treaty. If a treaty is defined by the Senate gave their advice and consent and the president ratified a treaty as defined in the Constitution, this was not that. What happened was the UN and the WHO, they wrote a constitution for the WHO. Their 75th anniversary was April 7th. So the WHO launched, I wasn't there, so I'm just reading history, on April 7th, 1948. On June 14th, Congress had passed a joint resolution accepting membership and the Constitution as it was. Harry Truman, the president, signed it. So we got involved on June 14th, so a couple of months after. The problem that we're dealing with today is 75 years old. The Congress could have written a resolution that said, okay, great, we're going to join the WHO, but we're going to have an election to choose the delegate to represent the nation. They could have said, well, Congress will choose the delegate to go to the WHO. But, they probably didn't think there was anything wrong with it. They said, well, we'll let the president choose, effectively a health ambassador. So in the legislation, it says that the president gets to choose the delegate. Typically, they choose the Secretary now of Health and Human Services, which currently is Javier Becerra, and he was the person who was the chief delegate this past meeting.
And there's clearly a lot of reasons they selected him too, because he's been carrying water for this movement even before, right? He's shown his colors since he's been in office, dealing with the shutdown of the churches where you are there. Grace Community Church, with John MacArthur went directly up against Becerra and Newsom. So this is a guy that's he's his
team player. His team player.
Yeah, he's a company man.
Okay, there you go. And so for many years, there's a couple of other aspects to the legislation that are very important. One of them was it said that we're happy to join the WHO, but nothing that the WHO says would be an obligation for the United States. There's no requirement that we have to do anything they say. We're happy to help, but you can't tell the U.S. what to do. The other aspect of it was we reserved the right to leave anytime we wanted to. We gave our word that we would pay them any money that we had been obligated to contribute, would settle that, and we would have to give a 1-year notice. But it's just write a letter to the WHO and say, sorry, we're not happy anymore, we're leaving. And so that'll come into play a little bit later. In 1969, the World Health Assembly had their 22nd meeting. I think that adds up properly. And it was actually in Boston. And that is where they adopted the international health regulations. So those sanitary regulations that had been for century plus, kind of, things got cleaned up. So they needed to revise, or they felt they needed to revise it. And they wrote the first version of the international health regulations. And they said, if you agree to this, then we'll move forward with that. Well, to my knowledge, nobody came back and asked we the people if we were okay. I was 9 years old at the time, so I don't really remember. But it was adopted. Nobody disagreed. They made some amendments in the 70s and the 80s. But after SARS-1 and the anthrax scare after 9/11, I said, oh, we need to revise these regulations. And they pretty much shredded it and rewrote it. And in 2005, came up with a new version that includes in there the opportunity for any nation to reject the amendments. If you could excuse me just one moment. And so serious changes were made in 2005, and included in that, the United States missed the deadline of 18 months through which they could reject any of those things.
Back when these
in 2005,
yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
And a month after the deadline, they submitted a statement that said, well, you know, we're a federal government, so we'll do what we can to abide by the requirements, but we're going to have to push this down to the states. I mean, that's actually on page 61 of the International Health Regulations. But it was still the case that if any amendments were to be adopted, the president could reject them. But back in 1948, we handed, or the Congress at the time, handed that authority over to the executive branch. And so that transfer took the power away from we the people and our representatives. And nobody said anything, because who was paying attention? You know, World War II was over. People were busy making babies, quite frankly. You know, that's when the baby boom started. And so in 2005, and for the 18, or well, in the story I'm telling, 17 years after that, coming up to 2022, we were operating under the International Health Regulations. Now, that's a document that you can download from my website. You can go to stopthewho.com and you can read it. And it's not all that horrible the way it is. I would love to change a few things, but what is the obligations that we agreed to, where we had previously said, you can't tell us to do anything. Well, you know, the camel got its head under the tent flap and started getting into the tent. We agreed to create what's called a national IHR focal point. And for most people, they've never heard those words put together in that order. What the heck is that? It's the point person or agency or office in every nation. Every nation has a national IHR focal point. And their job is, if there's a elevation in, you know, a certain disease or deaths, they're supposed to alert the WHO as soon as they learn that there's some kind of problem going on. There's an outbreak of this or that. As soon as they get wind of it, they're supposed to tell the WHO. And so we did accept that obligation. We're oblagated to give them that information.
At this point, they're just assuming that they're going to be there to help, right? They're going to be this body of scientists who are going to study the problem and make sure, help us to stop it.
Alert the world. Hey, you know, there's a problem in this nation. You might want to be aware of it, and so forth and so on.
Who would argue against that, right?
And the actual wording of the current regulations, it doesn't have any teeth. It's a paper tiger. They can't really make anybody do anything. But the encouragement is to not panic and lock everything down. I mean, there's wording in there, you know, please don't, you know, stop travel and airfare and, you know, ships and all that sort of thing. You know, don't go crazy, right? You know, get the information and react appropriately. But there isn't any way to enforce that. And so the camel got its head under the flap in the sense that we agreed to have a couple of requirements made of us to do this reporting. And that's where, you start setting these precedents where you agree to this, you agree to this, you agree to this. And it's like, you give them an inch and they'll take a mile. Well, we've given them an inch, we've given them a foot, they're coming for the mile with what's going on now. So when I came into this a little bit more than a year ago, and I discovered a document from the Biden administration, they had decided that they wanted to propose amendments to the international health regulations, and they submitted it on January 18th of last year. And they had a little press release and somebody wrote an article about it, but for the most part, silence. I couldn't find any other articles other than the one that were written about it. I found it on March 28th, and it was never made officially public until April 12th. The WHO finally, in getting ready for their assembly last year, they finally made that document public. And when I realized that, it wasn't that I found a document on somebody's blog, that could have been fake. I didn't think it was. But okay, now it shows up as an official document with the seal of the Geneva Ambassador's Office. This is the real deal. I really started spreading the word. And one of the folks that I communicated with is a Nigerian American person who is a pastor. And he was associated with a number of pastors in Africa. And it wasn't actually until a couple of days ago that he actually told me what happened. So I've gone this whole year wondering, how did this really happen? So he had a meeting with a group of quite a number of pastors, and he told them about what the Biden administration was doing. And at first they didn't believe him. But then, they looked at the evidence. It's obviously just right there for them to see. And so they went home and spread the word and talked to whatever public officials they knew. It turns out that it came to the attention of officials in Ghana, and according to them, the president of Kenya took note of it. And then the word spread amongst the African nations that these amendments that the Biden administration had proposed might not be in their best interest. And so the way the WHO likes to operate is they like to have all these backroom agreements so that when they get into their public assembly, it's already, everything's decided. They don't want to have an argument, show up. And so they work on what they call consensus. If they can reach consensus, which means nobody objects, they're quite happy. And then what they can do is come into the public assembly and have people give pretty little speeches and praise everybody. And then they go, okay, we're considering this document. Does anybody have any objections? They wait about 10 seconds and they go, okay, I don't see any objections. Boom, you pass it. Well, if you were a casual observer of that process, you'd be like, what just happened? Okay, you got to read the document, you got to know all the intrigue, you got to realize that all these deals were made to make it happen. But it happens so fast, if you're just watching and you're not really digging in, all kinds of things happen, and you got to go and dig afterwards to find out what they really did. Well, the Biden amendments were kicked to the curb. They didn't even consider that document because they knew it was going to trigger a bunch of arguments. And so what they did, I think, was illegitimate according to their rules. A number of nations, the United States, United Kingdom, the European Union, Japan, Monaco, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a handful of others, proposed a different set of amendments last year, including one that overlapped. And that's the one that's really important. And it did pass. It was adopted. They had some debates going on. And what they decided to do was not like the end all, Armageddon, horrible, destructive things that they're trying to do now. They agreed to shorten the period that nations would have to reject the amendments. The period of time is 18 months currently, and the Biden administration wanted to shorten it to 6 months, from 18 to 6 months. They negotiated about that and got some additional things put into the other amendments and settled in on 10 months. And that's actually really pretty important, and I'll explain why. So the amendments that they adopted last year to change that time frame, we have 18 months to reject them. So we're 12 months in. We've got less than 6 months from last May. And so by the end of November, every nation on the planet has the opportunity to reject that change.
So that's the first. That's our first, as we see.
That's our first segment.
First timeline right there would be November. For what to happen exactly? Just to
for
clarify.
The leader, whomever might speak for the nation, of all nations, could be the king of Thailand. Okay, could be whatever prime minister or premier or president, whatever the leader might be. It could potentially be a foreign minister if they have the authority to speak for the nation. Could be an ambassador that could speak for the nation. All depends on your nation's rules. But all they would have to do is write a letter, notify the WHO. Thank you very much for your wonderful little amendments that you snuck in last year, but they don't apply to our nation.
Okay.
We want the full time to consider whatever changes you make in the future. Why would you take away the opportunity to consider something, have your nation and your parliament consider all these changes? They wanted to squeeze it down to 6 months, and I'll explain why. Next year, 2024, in May, 6 months after that would be right around the time of the election in 2024. Well, it got negotiated to 10 months, which brings you to March. So whoever's the president in the next term, 2025, could just come into office and go, nope, I reject them. So they wanted to shorten that period of time so that it would be too late by the time the next administration came into office. And so I see, I'm not psychic, okay? Yeah. But in my view of what I want to see in the near future is the next 18 months from now until November 2024, there's going to be a bunch of people running for a whole bunch of offices. What's your opinion on giving the WHO more authority? Or do you think we should leave? Okay. And so I know there's a handful of things that I want to talk about in this first segment. So before I move on, I want to try to make sure I've not forgotten any of those things. There are many nations who probably, I'm going to guess you folks have heard of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment. And in there...
Vaguely familiar, I think, at this point.
You probably got one in your back pocket, but part of it is we have, it's not that the Constitution or the Bill of Rights gives us these rights.
This
it's an inherent God-given right to freedom of speech and so forth. But when you set up a government, you have every right in the world to petition that government for a redress of grievances. Well, in Canada and in the United Kingdom and in Australia, and I just heard from somebody from Belgium, they have pages on their government website where people can go and say, hey, I'm not happy. I want to have a petition. And the government website hosts the petition, and they go through an approval process. You don't want people putting up, crazy things, because you want to make sure it's a legitimate request. And so once it's approved, now you're dealing with a government petition that if you meet whatever by law requirement you need to meet, government has to respond. They're obligated to respond. Where in the world is that system in our government. Now there's all kinds of companies that will steal your data and set up a petition, but it doesn't make the government respond to your redress of grievances. It's just data collection, right? You get a bunch of names, and maybe the organization wants to fundraise, and, oh, we're supporting this cause, put your name in. Yeah, and maybe they deliver a pile of paper to some official, but they could just throw it in the garbage. It's not an official government petition. Now, in Canada, they wrote up, a citizen in Canada wrote a petition saying, hey, we want Parliament to address this issue. There were these amendments from last year, and you guys need to discuss this. We need to have a vote on this. What the heck is going on here? And so they only needed 500 signatures. And in 30 days, they got just shy of 19,000. In Australia, they're in the middle of it. Every time I look, it's moving. I mean, I can open up the window and it'll just keep moving. They're well over 30,000 signatures now. They've got a little more than a week to go. And in the United Kingdom, they have a greater population. The population of the United Kingdom is about 1/5 or so of the United States. So they need to get 100,000 signatures to require a debate in Parliament. And they're well over 50,000 so far. They've still got plenty of time. Last year, they had a petition to debate the proposed treaty, and that debate actually happened on April 17th. And so you can see that on my Substack. Interestingly enough, the United Kingdom has more representatives than us. They have 600, I think, and 47 members of Parliament. And so each member of Parliament represents about 70,000 people, where each member of Congress represents 750,000 people. So if you think about it, we should be able to nag on our congressperson a lot harder. We've got 10 times as many people per representative. And so we'll get into how you can do that when we talk about, what you can and should do.
All right. Well, I was reading through your stuff too, and it looks like that there's clearly, I think you mentioned this already, but when the U.S. joined the WHO, there was, I think, did you say this earlier that we had already written in there reserving the right to withdraw at any time in the future? That was in 1948, because there was no language in the original.
Right. We, in our document, and we'll get to that when we talk about what we're doing.
All right.
But the language in the 1948 joint resolution said, if we want to leave, we're leaving. I mean, when you volunteer to help, you can stop volunteering. Okay. And so to try to wrap up this first part of what happened last year, I've been trying to raise awareness of it, starting to get some traction. And so people in Canada and the United Kingdom and Australia have put forth official petitions to get their parliament to discuss, hey guys, wait a minute. You gave away the power to control this. And this is what happened. Last year, they adopted amendments, and we're 12 months in, you got 6 months more. We need to discuss rejecting these because we don't like it. Why would we shorten the time to have a nation consider changing international law? Okay. Now, it's mostly a proof of concept, because if they had not actually done what they did last year, and if I was warning about this, people wouldn't want to hear it. It's like, oh, that you're crazy, Jim. Parliament's going to have to talk about it. Well, I've sent emails to every member of Congress. I've sent emails to every member of the Australian, New Zealand, United Kingdom, and Canadian Parliament saying, hey, this is the situation. You should pay attention. And I have a growing collection of responses from, government officials, or at least their offices, and they just don't know what they don't know.
It's true. There's a lot of these guys sit there in these positions. They have, they're pretty busy people to start with. There's a lot of things, and they're trying to remain in office too. So they got to fundraise, they got to serve the constituents. We would hope, and so they're not. I guess they don't have the time to deep dive on this topic.
And so the reality of it is that if you're not dependable or worthy to handle things when they're small, if you're just going to blow this off and say, oh, the parliament will handle it or government will handle it, what about when the next batch of amendments, if they adopt them next year, you don't realize that it's structurally impossible because you gave that authority to the president that back in 1948. We need to stop the negotiations, because if the negotiations continue to the point where they're adopted, you're depending on the president to say no. Well, the president's the one who's pushing for these things. So we, the people, need to make it very clear that we do not give their negotiating team our authority to even be involved in these negotiations. And there's a really good reason why. So I'll move forward in time just a little bit. Or actually,
well, that's a good point. Let's underline that point right there, because as being an American citizen, and that definition might be difficult to nail down today. Well, it is in the public square. We know what it means.
Being a man or a woman alive, in this nation. Yes.
Now, that's even outside of what we call the 14th Amendment citizenship. The point of all this is that we were, by God, we were this, His providence, we were given this system of government, nothing ever like it before, where we're the sovereigns, all of us together, popular sovereignty. So it's up to us. If things are going bad, we can complain, but when it comes down to it, it's up to us to actually initiate that change, to start that change. Like you said, it's voluntary.
With that authority comes responsibility.
Yeah, that's it. That's the point. There's a lot of responsibility to be free, because being free is not free. It requires effort.
So what happened in the last number of years, and maybe this is a second section of what we're talking about. I'll try to keep it all very focused.
Okay.
I feel that these negotiations are being based on a completely fraudulent foundation, right? If you go back to the beginning of 2020, all through 2020, that was the year of COVID. Starting at the beginning of 2021, everybody's getting jabbed up. And the promise and the belief at the time, and not to get you booted off of YouTube or anything, the things that they were saying were going to get us out of this situation was, to stick things in people. And the promise was that it was going to prevent you from having a problem. And then things are going to go back to normal, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least the new normal. And so by November, end of November, December, there was a problem going on that people in the United States probably really didn't think about very much, because we were the cause of the problem. Nations who didn't have enough money to buy large contracts or sign large contracts with the drug manufacturers and the injection manufacturers felt that the fact that Europe and the United Kingdom and the United States and Canada and Australia, New Zealand, purchasing 10 times what maybe they needed was unfair trade practices, that they were not being treated fairly in the marketplace for these purportedly life-saving injections. And so they called for a special session of the World Health Assembly, and they agreed that they needed a treaty to more equitably dispense what they felt would be life-saving. And so that mindset is what started this whole process. And you could see where the fork in the road is going to lead you. Time passed from December 2021, now we're in June 2023, and the awareness of whether or not all of the jabs were beneficial or problematic, the information has grown exponentially, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages of documents saying, hold on a minute, those things aren't as good as they said they were. And so I'll just put it this way. When somebody uses the word safe
or effective,
it's not, I'm going to separate them.
Okay.
When they say the word safe, it's not there's no legal definition of that word.
That's right.
You might think it's safe to jump out of an airplane with a parachute on your back. I'm going to say there's enough risk involved that I'll pass on it. And I'll explain safety this way. You've ever heard of Russian roulette? You've got a revolver with 6 chambers and somebody puts a bullet in one of them. It's 84% safe. Happens to be 16% deadly. Now, is that safe? Well, I can't tell you how many people say, oh, I got the shot and nothing happened, no problem. All right, well, how about 6 capsules that one of them has a slow-acting poison in it? It's 84% safe.
Now, that was like recently when the EPA was up in East Palestine, and they showed up on the scene, and they went to the lady's house and they drank the water. Look, it's okay. The problem's not now. The problem's going to be 6 months or 6 years from now. So that's what they do. It's a show.
Problem's not that glass of water. It's the next one, or
Yeah.
And so the word safe is not a legally defined term.
Did you call it a term of art? Would that be?
Yeah, exactly. And so effectiveness, interestingly enough, can be negative. You can do something that has a negative effect. So when they craft a study and they get the early results and they go, oh, it's X% effective. Started out at 95, then it was 90, then it was 80, then it was 70. And now it's actually like minus 5 to 50,000% effective. I can say it's effective, but if in my mind I'm thinking, well, it's negatively effective, I don't want to say that. I'll just say it's really effective in a negative way, but I just don't manage to say that. So when somebody says it's safe and effective, they're lying. That's not how the law is structured. You're obligated to give a risk-benefit analysis. Maybe it's going to do some good for you, but maybe you're going to get certain percentage of people are going to have these side effects and a certain number of people are going to die. And so it's not that you give your informed consent you're to something that is safe and effective. It's you're analyzing the risks versus the benefit on an individual basis. And the person makes the determination, the risks outweigh the benefit as far as I'm concerned. And certainly for little tiny babies, there was no risk at all. And so any potential from COVID is what I meant. And the injections had nothing but risk, because what would the benefit be? There was no danger. And so that mindset, now that we're in the middle of these negotiations, they're only negotiating how to distribute these poisonous and deadly substances more equitably. Now, I published an article a couple of months ago, The Elephant in the Room, and it had some data in it from the WHO's website. And what that data shows is that, and many people don't realize this, if you live in the United States and you can envision North and South America, all told, there's about 1 billion people in North and South America combined. In Africa, there's 54 nations. 7 of them are around the Mediterranean, so they're in the Mediterranean region for the WHO. But the 47 other nations are in the African region, and they have about 1.2 billion people. So a lot of people associate Africa with the Sahara and the Kalahari Desert and the jungle, and they don't realize there's a lot of people in Africa. And there's actually more people in Africa than in North and South America combined. And the data that the WHO had on their website, I screen captured it because it may disappear, is astonishing. 16 times as many people in North and South America had their deaths attributed to COVID as compared to Africa. But yet, when you talk to people like Dr. Shankara Chetty, who's just been saving people left and right, why aren't we going to Africa and asking them, what did you do? What they're actually arguing is, well, you guys had all of the drugs and all the jabs, and you didn't share them with the people in Africa and other nations, and that's not fair. So we want to have a treaty where we get more of the stuff that killed 16 times more people. The medical system used in the Americas killed 16 times more people than in Africa. But the treaty is talking about building out all of that infrastructure in Africa. And so these negotiations are fraudulent in the sense that what we really need is an inquiry or an inquisition or a commission or some investigation into learning from what we've done over the past 4 years and not repeating it. Well, instead of saying that thing that they stuck up your nose, let me tell you, that's not a test.
Right, yeah.
That's a process that's used to confuse people that don't have any symptoms to believe that they are a case.
Okay, well then there we go again. We've got another word called a test,
Yep.
and we've got a word called symptoms. Let me just, for the people, just to inject right here, it seems like what terms of art are. There really, I've got a definition here. Often technical, jargonistic, they may not be commonly understood by people outside the field, used by professionals to communicate efficiently and precisely among themselves. So, it's terms of art are essentially specialized vocabulary that experts use to communicate within their field. And I might even go a little more cynical on that. There can be used as terms they use to just obfuscate their actual plans or maybe even their ineptitude.
That's one of my favorite words, because for many people, the word obfuscate does exactly what it says. It just is meant to confuse people. And so, you use a word that somebody doesn't know or use it in a different way. And that's a whole rabbit hole for our next conversation that we talked about with medical terminology. Okay?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
so what is needed is an investigation into the mistakes, the misjudgment, to be kind, the mistakes, and quite frankly, the crimes that were committed on testing, on the use of medications, on the injections, on the social things like the masking and the social distancing and the travel restrictions and the lockdowns. And I still don't understand curfews. Something happens at night that doesn't happen during the day. The insanity of making people stay inside, where you're more likely to have air that is going to cause respiratory problems than being outside. All of that needs a thorough exposure. Put all that dirty laundry out so people can see what was actually done and learn from it. But no, what happened was back in December of 2021, they just decided that they were not getting enough of the goodies, and people were hogging and being greedy, and nations were buying up tons and tons of jabs. And in the interim, they're on a mission, they have a mandate, and they just want to put forth an agreement to restructure how products are manufactured and sold. But none of this has anything to do with health. Okay? Which maybe we can close the chapter on what are we even doing here? Why are they even having these negotiations? We need to have an investigation into who did what, who overreached beyond their lawful authority, who just simply made a mistake and should be fired, who was just following orders, right? And this is what needs to be done, and it needs to be done now, before everybody forgets what really happened.
Those are good points. It might be, yeah. to just put an underline under that, it's we live in a world now where legal rights and wrongs rather than what's lawful or unlawful, and there's a lot of confusion. This goes back a little bit back to the terminology, and I think people would do well to have a basic understanding of what it means to have God-given rights that are people. You hear people in the streets come, give me my rights. You have your rights. God's given you rights. It's up to you to exert your rights and be willing to accept the consequences for it. That's what being free is.
What they really should be saying is, give me some privileges.
Yes.
Give me some benefits.
And by the way, if you get privileges, then you got duties to go along with those.
Right. As opposed to stop trampling on my rights. They're God-given. Right. You're not allowed to trample on them, and I'm going to stop you from trampling on my rights that I got from my Creator. So to try to wrap this up, the folks in Canada over the last couple of months have been, just the people, not the government, the people have been meeting in various locations in various provinces in Canada, and they've had a national citizens inquiry. They've got days worth of video testimony of the harms that people suffered, not just physical harm from jabs and drugs and things like that, but emotional harm, mental trauma, and financial harm for sure. And they also took a lot of expert testimony. And so I still have a lot to just wrap my head around so I can publish an article about all of the fine work that they have done. But I challenge everyone in the United States and every other nation, we need to demand that type of reckoning happen. Because we're not going to heal from this unless we address it. And what they're trying to do with these negotiations is just go, oh no, don't look at that. Let's just move on. Give us all the power and money, and we'll move forward with these new international agreements. It's like, hold on just a minute. You made a mess of the last 4 years. You harmed and killed and, quite frankly, murdered many, many people and left many people deeply damaged on many different levels. You don't just walk away from that and say, yeah, okay, we're moving forward. There needs to be, I'm not talking about vengeance, I'm talking about justice and awareness of what actually happened so that we don't let that happen again.
Actual justice, which comes usually from the bottom up, and that's the problem today, is that everything is confused about, we talked about rights and people's feelings, and we've got terms like social justice. The word justice doesn't need any qualifiers before it. That's what we want is justice. And there is a standard for that. Just before we went on a minute ago, we were discussing that a little bit. When you go to make an argument against this whole global system that's coming at us, it's the way to win that argument always is to appeal from the transcendent, eternal standard that doesn't change. It can't be debated. It's there, and God has put the moral law on everyone's heart, but for different reasons, people suppress that truth in unrighteousness all the time, and it's up to us to remind the government that they're subject to the supreme authority, whether it's the World Health Organization, who, by the way, in one of your latest articles, these groups are moving now to create this Conference of Parties.
Let's not jump into that one.
That's on down the line, but yeah, it's just a matter that we need to be responsible right here. That's the point. Okay,
so the core of the fact that they're even having these negotiations is flawed. It's rotten to the core. They're talking about the wrong thing, and we'll get to what they're actually talking about next. So far, we've talked about the history, how we got into it with the original things back in 1948, 1969, and then what happened last year. And so one of the things that happened last year brings us to the present day. When all of the nations pushed back and they saw that the United States was trying to change or amend the regulations, I think they realized, hey, that's not a bad idea. We ought to show you how to do that. And so they adopted also a agreement that they said to all of the nations, we're going to create a working group to consider amendments to the international health regulations. All nations, please submit your proposed amendments by September 30th, 2022. And so now that we've seen what has happened at that time, 94 of the 194 nations submitted 197 pages with 307 proposed amendments to the international health regulations. Now, that was done mostly by the deadline of September 30th. I believe Korea and Malaysia gave theirs a little bit late, but they accepted them anyways. And then they proceeded to keep it completely secret until mid-December. They finally got around to publishing it in the middle of December. I published an article about it. I've written many, many articles about it. And so these are the 307 amendments to the international health regulations.
I've got a copy of that on the screen. If when we bring those up, I can try to find a couple of those when you mention.
Oh, I'm going to tell you not to bother, because it's just a conjumbled mess of words that'll just fry people's minds. We'll save them the torture. Suffice it to say, all of these documents are available on stopthewho.com. If you want to go there, there's a handful of things that we can talk about. But let's just keep talking. I'll go through maybe a half a dozen of the 300, and it's just astonishing. But these are the amendments that could possibly be considered at the next assembly next year. But there's a little bit of a twist to it. They're obligated to get them all tidied up and ready to be submitted mid-January of 2024, because there's a rule that they're supposed to submit them 4 months in advance of the meeting or the assembly, so that everybody gets a chance to look them over. And Bangladesh proposed an amendment to the first article of the IHR, which is where they define all of the terms. And so this comes right out of Newspeak from the novel 1984. They want to redefine a commonly understood word. So if you want to talk about words of art, they want to change the definition, or they're proposing to change the definition of standing and temporary recommendations. I think if you asked a grade school kid or a high school kid for sure, what's the definition of a recommendation? And if you said, is that a non-binding bit of advice? So Bangladesh would cross out the words non-binding. Malaysia proposed another amendment that said recommendations shall be implemented as soon as possible. Well, even the International Health Regulations Review Committee said, well, wait a minute. If you make a recommendation an obligation, you're really messing with people's heads. You're messing with the language. And that would change the entire nature of the international health regulations. And the WHO as a whole organizational body, it would go from being an organization that is advisory in nature, and it would be a command and control dictatorial regime. If the Director General could just give orders and you had to follow him, he's not a Director General anymore, that's a Dictator General. Now, the change that they proposed to Article 2, which is the scope of the regulations, says, well, when there's an emergency, here's the rules in the IHR that everybody's supposed to follow. They want to expand the scope from an emergency to anything that has the potential to be an emergency.
Yeah.
Well, somebody could see a set of stairs and say, oh, well, somebody might fall down the set of stairs. That potentially could be a problem. It opens it up to anything. The most egregious soundbite change that has been proposed was proposed by India in Article 3, the first section of Article 3, which are the core guiding principles of the regulations, which currently says that they have to be implemented with full respect for the dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of people. India has proposed crossing that out. If that pesky dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms has been weighing on your shoulders, they want to lift you of that burden and take it away from you. Now, when I first saw that, my jaw dropped open, and I noticed that my jaw was hanging open, and I tried to push it back up, and it kept opening up. It was like, I guess I was surprised. But then I looked at it, and I thanked God for the blessing, because that is so absurd. Changing the meaning of the word recommendation is pretty bad. Making an emergency be the potential for an emergency is pretty bad. But just crossing out dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, I said that's a blessing, because if you show that to people and they cannot see that that is a problem and take action to do something in opposition to it, then you're speaking to someone who's deaf and dumb and blind, and you probably should move on, because if that doesn't wake them up, I don't know what will.
Well, that's what it sounds like. The vague this vague replacement that comes after it there, based on the principles of equity, inclusivity, coherence of what? In accordance with their common but differentiated responsibilities. And so that's I guess that's more that's easier to understand, rather than respect for dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms of persons.
So I'd like to cover two more out of the 307. This one really doesn't get much attention. And I've noticed actually that it's not transcribed properly from one document to the other. They sort of kind of manipulated it a little bit. But, excuse me, there's an office in every government, called the National IHR Focal Point. And they're the person who's supposed to communicate when there's an emergency. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we just talked about that to a certain degree. Okay. I've had so many conversations, it's all a blur. And so, did we cover that earlier on? I think we did.
About specifically the emergencies? About
the
how,
international health regulations focal point?
No, you're talking about the person that should be in each nation. I guess we need to, let's cover that quick. Yeah.
Okay. You know what? I've had so many conversations. I think it was the previous interview. So I'll cover it again. As part of the international health regulations, each nation has to assign an office called the National IHR Focal Point. And their job is to communicate any kind of problem that is happening in their nation as soon as possible to the World Health Organization. So if there's an outbreak or higher rates of disease, as soon as possible they tell the WHO about it. Well, Russia has proposed an amendment that says each nation that would be obligated to abide by the rules with the IHR would have to enact legislation to authorize and empower that office, the National IHR Focal Point, to implement and enforce the obligations under the agreements. And so a lot of people say, well, how would the WHO enforce all of these new agreements?
That's one of the big questions, yeah.
This is exactly where it would be done. The proposed amendment from Russia would make it an obligation for each nation to empower someone in their own governmental structure to enforce this. They would confuse us to get us to agree to set up inside our own government an agency that would be the enforcer for whatever dictates might come down. Now, that's pretty much what the CDC and the FDA and all of your local county health commissioners did. They said, oh, the WHO said that we have to do this. Well, they're taking it to a whole nother level. This is an order of magnitude. Imagine, people who overstepped their authority and caused harm to people by forcing them to lock down their businesses or get the jabs or whatever it might be. People lost their jobs. And they were just doing that on a recommendation. They said, oh, they recommended this, so we're going to do this to you. What if those same people, who are most likely still in office, looked at it and said, oh, well, the IHR Focal Point is authorized and they have spoken. We must obey their orders. If you thought it was bad before, imagine when there's an internationally agreed upon set of regulations that they could point to and say, "Oh, we're just doing our job. We have to."
It's there in Article 4 of the IHR amendments, and what's interesting about this is it's called a national competent authority, someone who's responsible for the implementation. So this is the enforcement part, and I can speculate for just a moment. It looks to me like at least someone like Becerra, Secretary of the DHHS, might be a type of person that would fill that role well, given the current regime we have in office at the moment, and given the fact also of these federal agencies since about 2012 or 2015, in an odd story from at openthebooks.com, are being armed. The Department of Health and Human Services is going to have more firepower than the new IRS. And then you've got this here where it says, look, we need this national competent authority who will be the one who will enforce it. Meanwhile, all of these the federal agencies are being armed. We have a problem. We have a big problem. And it's important that we have this talk, and maybe this will be the thing that
related to this, in the state of Western Australia. I think it was September of last year, I wrote an article, Kill the Bill. They put through legislation that empowered people to do some of the most egregiously horrible, offenses against human rights. They've empowered, planning for the future. Basically, government goons, could do so many things, take your home, destroy your home if they determined that it was the thing to do. Take your car, take your property, quarantine people, so forth and so on. Research the legislation that they've already put in place in Western Australia. And if that doesn't scare the bejeebers out of you, you're pretty tough. But it's horrible. And these types of attempts to legislate are going on all over the place in advance of any approval of the regulations that might come in 2024. They're busy building out all of these things, which brings me to the last thing I really want to talk about in terms of the amendments that are currently being negotiated in secret. There's approximately a dozen amendments that I lumped together. Many of them, I think, are being driven by the nations in the European Union, where they want to institute a global digital health certification network. Most people would say global ID or vaccine passport, but it goes beyond the vaccine passport idea. I actually have my girlfriend's vaccine passport from when she traveled quite some time ago.
Yes,
and it has a little form that's filled out, and it looks like a passport booklet. And that's the state of the art as we speak right now. In Annex 6 of the International Health Regulations, you'll see that form. And so if you go to certain nations in Africa and elsewhere, if there's a yellow fever outbreak, they might recommend that you have a vaccine. And what they want to do is expand that beyond vaccine certification. You would have to have testing certification, prophylaxis certification, recovery certification, a passenger health declaration, a traveler locator form. They want everyone to get a unique QR code for your person, so that if you want to travel, you have to show that code, and you would be at the mercy of whoever has access to your medical records. If you haven't done what they want you to do to your body, when you scan your code, it's going to come up negative, and you're going to have your life restricted. You're not going to be able to go somewhere or do something. And this Global Digital Health Certification Network, it's so unbelievably flawed. How do you actually certify that someone is healthy? I mean, talk about your wide range of variable things. If you think about what they currently have attempted to do that has failed miserably, I think I can summarize it by trying to repeat what the Indonesian health minister said at the B20 in November of 2020. He was very proud that they had submitted some of these amendments that I just mentioned. And the story that he told was just filled with what I call lies. He said that, well, back at the beginning of 2020, we had to lock down the world. It's like, well, if you want to argue biblical time frame or archaeology time frame, whether it's 6,000 years or 6 million years or whatever the length of time is that humans have been on the planet, we've been doing okay so far without a vaccine passport. Okay, so I don't think you had to lock the world down.
We did fine without a World Health Organization.
We did fine without a World Health Organization and an FDA and a CDC and everything else.
Right.
Then he went on to say, well, the lockdowns hurt the economy. Well, they hurt mom and pop. They didn't hurt the big box stores and Amazon and other, government officials all got paid, right? Then he said the two big lies. He said, well, if you're properly vaccinated or properly tested, then you can move around. Yeah. And both of those things are just flat out lies, because the injections didn't stop transmission. They actually increased it. And the testing isn't even testing. And so the lies built in to this global digital health certification network are just absurd. And if you do nothing else, go to rejectdigitalenslavement.com. It's a website that I put together because I think that is the one thing that they really, really want. It's going to be hard to stop it, but the way we stop it is people who say, look, there's this thing called unalienable right to privacy. Mm-hmm. It's enshrined in the Fourth Amendment. A lot of people know the First and the Second for sure, but they forget about the Fourth. You have a right to security in your person and your papers. Please go read the Fourth Amendment. Nobody can make you do anything to your body. You've got a ring around you that once people are in your space, messing with your private area of the universe, you have rights. And nobody's allowed to invade that space or invade your body by forcing you to do something that you don't want to do. And the paperwork that goes along with it is also your private paperwork as well. And so people make the mistake of going to a doctor in a clinic or an urgent care or hospital or whatever. Oh, could you please sign in? Well, when you check the box that agrees to the terms of service, the document most likely says that they can take your data and do whatever they want to do with it.
That's all they do now. They're there to collect information. When you go to the doctor, that's pretty much what it is. They're there from the time you walk in now, when they're taking your temperature and asking you where you've been for the past 3 months.
Yeah, and I was just going to chime in and say that they don't even touch you, really. It's just like they stand away from you and they ask you a bunch of questions, and they barely even check your lymph nodes or anything.
Yeah. James wouldn't know that.
They get paid to collect that data. It's a billable experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So your position about staying out of that system seems to make a lot of sense.
Absolutely, as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And so here's the challenge to everyone listening. I've heard many people, stand up and say, "Oh, I have a freedom of speech. I have freedom of the press." People certainly defend the Second Amendment. When's the last time you heard somebody stand up for their unalienable rights that are guaranteed and protected by the Fourth Amendment? Do you think that's where the problem is? If you're willing to allow them to invade the secure area around your body and inside of it by getting them to coerce you into getting jabbed, and then have paperwork to document it that would enable someone else to determine whether or not you can travel, do you think the founding fathers were pretty smart?
Yeah.
How many people do you know are standing up for the Fourth Amendment? Let's get started. We need to start doing that. And so all of these attacks on our unalienable rights, if you have the capability to play a video while we're talking, there's one that is in particular that for me summarized the whole 10 days or whatever it was worth of meetings. If you can go to my latest article on Substack, is that a possibility? Can we get a video to play?
Yep, no problem. We can do that.
It's the title of it is Power Grab by the
outrageous power grab. Yeah, we've got
outrageous power grab. The second video down is a very short video. If you click on it a couple of times, it'll go over to YouTube, maybe make it easier for you to play. Yeah. This is an excerpt of, on May 22nd, they had some roundtable discussions, not the official assembly meetings, but people who are involved got together for some roundtable discussions. And the first one was about the amendments to the international health regulations, the treaty, and the UN is getting involved as well. So there were 3 segments to it. But if you're ready to cue up the video, the person who is speaking is the co-chairperson of the working group for the amendments to the international health regulations. He's the person who's a member of 6 in this working group that are essentially driving the process. And so what he had to say made my jaw hang open yet again.
All right, we'll play that right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the proposed amendment to the IHR call for introducing equity and developing robust and comprehensive implementation and compliance processes for the IHR. As far as the discussion have gone, the IHR amendments and the IMP processes are seen as complementary and mutually beneficial. Implementing the amended IHR shall enable member states to detect, prevent, and respond to public health emergencies and reduce the chance of pandemics. The world, however, requires a different level of legal mandates, such as the pandemic treaty, to navigate through a particular pandemic, should one occur, and it will.
And it will, he says. That was pretty confident.
Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties, mandating and sharing of information, knowledge and resources, and most importantly, providing fund for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
We're going to repeat that first part.
Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties are all necessary during a pandemic. Prioritizing actions that may restrict individual liberties, mandating and sharing of information, knowledge and resources, and most importantly, providing fund for pandemic control efforts are all necessary during a pandemic.
Now, it may be a cultural difference between Saudi Arabia and the United States, okay? But mandating the restrictions of your rights during an emergency that they can declare because there's a potential for a problem is just unacceptable. And he also said something about mandating the transfer of data and information. Okay, so that goes into the Fourth Amendment. When the person who is running the show in the negotiations is coming from the premise of we get to declare when it's an emergency and we get to restrict your rights, if Americans are not awake and willing to push back against that, maybe I'm going to be controversial here, but I do believe that that person should be removed from that position. That is not an acceptable position to begin and have him running the negotiations. You do not start from the premise that we're going to cross out dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and the person running the show as a co-chair says, you know, it's whenever there's an emergency, we have to restrict your rights. That is as un-American as I could possibly imagine anything being, and anyone who is in support of that, he should be removed from his position.
I like what you said there, that it could very well be a cultural moray. It could be the way they're used to doing things in that culture. But that's that culture. And see, that's one of the problems is when we come together and we try to blend all of this together in a one world system. There's just going to be, it's about equity. But it's not.
It's a kingdom. My understanding, Saudi Arabia is a kingdom, and if the mindset and the culture is such that only the king has been granted God-given sovereign control, as opposed to each and every human, man and woman, boy, that's an old thinking where there's a special privileged person who only they can be connected to God. I see how that flows down through the culture. There's a cultural clash here, and you can believe what you want to believe. That's freedom of religion, but that is unacceptable in political discourse to start from the premise that we're going to have an agreement that's crossing out your dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and when we say so, you have no rights. If any American can allow that to stand, they're not really an American deep down.
What's interesting about that is that is the language and what you've just described and the way they seem to do things there. That's kind of how it was in the Roman Empire. You had the emperor who was, in some cases at different times, worshipped as a god, or was the only one who had direct connection to God, and you had to the Christians in the first century weren't persecuted, they weren't fed to the lions or crucified for worshiping God or for proclaiming Jesus as Lord. They were killed for not recognizing Caesar as Lord. And that's Geneva. All of these organizations seem to be located in Geneva today, right? And it seems like there was a point in history where the Roman Empire came to that part of the world and then expanded on from there. And it looks like today there's a revolution, maybe a rebirth.
They're trying to recreate that.
Yeah, and all of this does seem to come up out of Geneva. It's like a new Tower of Babel there. And when you got to go ahead,
that's where the Bank of International Settlements and so forth. Yeah. And so, to try to wrap up this part about the amendments that are currently being negotiated in secret, I also am suspicious because what I feel is, when you negotiate something, if it's an honest negotiation and you're friends and you go, hey, this is what I want, that's what you want, you give me what I want, I give you what you want, we're good, let's go, right? You don't have to play any games. But in complicated negotiations with 194 nations, a lot of times things are put in to pull your attention to something that's just absolutely crazy. I don't know if you're all familiar with the Overton window, the concept of the Overton window. Yeah. Normal is what you do every day, and it's what you're accustomed to. It feels okay. That's where you're looking. If you want to change that, you shift what is viewed as acceptable, and part of the method by doing that is talking about something that's just absolutely absurd. And so what I think they're actually doing, all of the stuff that we just mentioned, changing the definition of recommendations, changing the scope, wiping out dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms, and all of that. What if, in the course of the negotiations, they go, yeah, okay, we won't insist on those things. We just want this global digital health certification network so we can track and trace you and control your lives, right? Well, that's not as crazy. It's crazy, but it's not as crazy as setting up a totalitarian, dictatorial, medical martial law, World Holocaust Organization. We just want to keep track of what you're doing. If they push it beyond crazy, and come back to just plain old crazy.
That's the idea. We push it. That's dialectical materialism. That's the idea of problem, reaction, solution. And that's one of the things that.
Oh, we're gonna get into that in the next one.
All right, that's good.
And so, I'm cautiously aware that the things that are obviously horrific could be thrown away in the negotiations, and then they slide in the things that they really want. And so in the documents that they published for up until this latest assembly, they buried in, this is primarily right now about yellow fever, and they buried under yellow fever, oh, well, we've got some information in Report O. What the heck is Report O? I had to go find Report O. And they had these progress reports, and there's a little paragraph in Report O that said, well, we're busy operationalizing the Global Digital Health Certification Network that's currently being negotiated. Now, my analogy for that, if you had 6 people and you said, hey, we're going to get a pizza. What do you want on the pizza? And then you called up and you ordered the pizza and you just told them whatever it was you wanted. And they'd go build the pizza and deliver it. By the pizza would show up hot, steaming, ready to be eaten before the 6 people decided what they wanted. And so what they're doing with this Global Digital Health Certification Network and laboratory networks and all kinds of other things that they're doing is they're busy building it.
Yeah.
And so by next May, it's going to be ready to go. They're doing it on a voluntary basis in a lot of states and a lot of countries. A lot of nations have digital, global IDs systems or vaccine certificate systems that are digitized. They just have to get it so all the systems talk to each other. They want it to be interoperable, is their word. If somebody asks you, do you want a pizza? And they say, well, what kind of pizza do you like? Here's a nice new pizza. You're like, oh, it looks pretty good. I'll take it. Right? So that's essentially what's happening. They're busy building all of these things out, passing laws in all of the many nations around the world and states and cities and counties. And when they finally get around to agreeing to some kind of paperwork and adopting something next year, it's already going to be in place.
Yeah.
So we all have to pay attention everywhere because they're doing it. They're not just negotiating it. That's for show. They're busy implementing these things, and we got to pay attention everywhere. And I think I'll wrap it up with this section.
Okay.
In that this is the second part of the puzzle. The amendments that were last year that we've got 6 months left, these amendments that are currently being considered, 307 of them, we need to stop these negotiations. Because if they have this submitted and considered, if our leadership wants to not reject them, if they adopt them, it's already in place. So on many, many levels, we've got to pay attention to all of the things that they're talking about here and stop them now. It's not next year. Don't wait till next year. We've got to push back on them in every location right now. And then that'll get me to the treaty. I think we got maybe an hour. I mean, you said normally you guys do about a 3-hour thing?
You can go, just go as long as you like.
Okay.
Take your time.
Take your time.
So,
get into it.
I'm going to fall asleep in an hour. So hopefully we'll keep it to that. And
that's
there's
fine.
there's really 2 more segments.
All right.
And one of them is what everybody calls the treaty, but I feel is a framework convention. And then I'd love to spend a lot of time talking about what people can do.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
really, stay for the end. That's the important part.
Yeah.
So separate from everything we've been talking about, more than a year ago, I read a big old article on March 24th of last year. And I summarized many, 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 many proposed proposals for the quote unquote pandemic treaty. And if you're able to dig up and look at my Substack and go all the way down the archive to the bottom,
Yep.
and dig up the pandemic treaty, there's another video that might be worth talking about because it's essentially where this all started. They commissioned a group, and the head of the group was a woman from New Zealand, and Helen Clark. She was a former prime minister, and apparently she was the tutor for Prime Minister Ardern, who recently resigned. And so They did a large study and they came up with proposals as to what they wanted to have in the treaty. And I'll talk about one part of it that did not end up in the treaty or framework convention. They also wanted to institute what they call a global health threats council at the level of heads of states. And so what they want to do is essentially create something that's already been created. I mean, not that I'm a fan, but in the United Nations, there's a Security Council.
Yeah.
It's been there for 75 plus years. But, you know, it may be the case that there are certain nations like Russia who are members of that Security Council and China who have the authority to veto whatever might be decided. Well, rather than say, look, maybe we should utilize the Security Council of the UN, which I'm not advocating for that, but they want to create through the United Nations a Security Threats Council, thinking that all of the leaders of all the nations would somehow come together and be able to solve all our problems. But they're also rumbling about giving the Secretary General more power in the instance of an emergency. And so if you're on the article, I don't know if you've been able to find it.
I've got it up there.
I believe it's the first video. It has a red stop sign with a hand in it. Okay. And if memory serves me, because it's a year ago, it might be worth playing that video.
All right, it's just the one that's 13 minutes.
I think that might be the one. It has a red hand on it.
It's got the hand. All right, yeah.
If it's wrong, I'll let you know.
Okay.
In May of 2021, the WHO's Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, IPPPR, presented its recommendations.
I want to encourage you to read the panel's report available online on the website www.theindependentpanel.org.
The report talks of the failure to learn from lessons that are starkly evident and the ability to create solutions that did not seem possible. We hope that this is the last report of its kind, sounding the alarm on how underprepared the world is for the next pandemic. We can and we must make sure that this indeed is the last pandemic.
We believe our report has set out a clear set of proposals, a timetable for action. We have assigned responsibilities to who needs to do what across nation states, the World Health Organization and the World Health Assembly and the UN General Assembly. We always said we wanted our proposals to be bold and we want them to be actionable. These proposals are actionable. And we hope, as President Sirleaf has stressed, that the reforms can be implemented as a package in an effort to ensure that this really can be the last pandemic.
Now on to our recommendations. These come as a direct result of the findings from our review. They should be implemented as a complete package. If fully implemented, the package can accelerate the end of the current pandemic and put the world on course to ensure that this will be the last pandemic to cause devastation on the scale we are experiencing now.
The IPPPR recommended creating a Global Health Threats Council.
We recommend a creation of a Global Health Threats Council at the level of heads of state and government. This body is not envisaged to replace WHO, but to complement it.
The IPPPR also suggested a special session of the United Nations General Assembly.
We are also suggesting a special session of the United Nations General Assembly and supporting the call for a pandemic framework convention.
We said earlier that our recommendations are a package, and we propose that support for that package be formalized in a negotiated political declaration, which would be adopted by a high-level special session of the UN General Assembly later this year. We also back the calls for a pandemic framework convention, which we think could fill the gaps in the current legal system and clarify the responsibilities between states and international organizations.
The IPPPR also recommended an increase in funding and greater authority for the WHO.
We propose that WHO is guaranteed financial and political independence.
The WHO sees the need for significant change in the global health architecture.
WHO believes change is needed in 3 areas. First, we need stronger governance. The need for significant change in the global health architecture for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response.
The WHO wants to be in control of a one-size-fits-all approach to public health.
In the face of a common threat, the world needs a common approach with common rules of the game that govern the global response.
The IPPPR also recommends lockdowns, masks, social distancing, contact tracing, testing, isolation, and quarantines.
On an ongoing basis, every country must utilize all the public health tools available to curb transmission. That's masking, it's social distancing, it's testing and contact tracing, it's isolation and quarantine. It's the proven menu for endeavoring to stop transmission of a disease.
On December 1st, 2021, the World Health Assembly voted to create an international negotiating body.
At a special session of the World Health Assembly last year, WHO's 194 member states decided to negotiate a new international instrument to provide an overarching framework for pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response.
The International Negotiating Body held its first meeting on March 1st, 2022.
An intergovernmental negotiating body for this new instrument, or INB, held its first meeting here at WHO headquarters in Geneva last week.
The WHO wants money.
So we propose a new modality, the creation of an international pandemic financing facility, which must be able to distribute up to $10 billion a year for preparedness and up to $100 billion in the event of a crisis. Ultimately, investing billions in preparedness now will save trillions in the future. We're also calling for Act A, the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, to be fully funded. That means its $19 billion funding gap needs to be closed. We understand the G20 is considering providing the full amount, which would be very welcome.
We need stronger financing. It's obvious that nationally and globally, we need substantial resources for strengthening global health security.
The WHO wants lots of money, $31 billion per year.
Our analysis estimates the needs at $31 billion per year.
The WHO also wants to be in complete control of how that money is spent.
We support the idea of a new dedicated financing facility anchored in and directed by WHO's constitutional mandate, inclusive governance and technical expertise.
The IPPPR recommended greater surveillance powers for the WHO.
A greatly improved system for disease surveillance and alert is also needed. We've described the current one as like an analog system operating in a digital age. WHO needs the authority to investigate outbreaks of concern rapidly, to publish information and deploy investigatory missions very, very promptly.
We need stronger systems and tools. Already, WHO has taken steps to build some of these new tools. To strengthen surveillance, we have established the WHO Hub for Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence in Berlin. And that's collective intelligence, which will be needed to detect cases as early as possible.
The IPPPR recommended that the WHO be given the authority to set benchmarks for healthcare systems around the world.
We're also calling on WHO to set benchmarks for country preparedness and response capacities, and for countries to invest accordingly. We think that WHO should now formalize universal periodic peer reviews of preparedness against the benchmarks it sets. We also bring the International Monetary Fund into the picture, proposing that it incorporate assessments of preparedness as part of its Article 4 consultations. Ultimately, preparedness rests on national governments, setting up the right structures, developing the needed capacities, and investing in vital assets such as health and other system resilience and social protection. Governments can listen and learn from the best practices illustrated in our report.
The WHO wants to set up a universal health and preparedness review in order to control healthcare in individual countries.
And to improve mutual accountability, solidarity, and cooperation between countries, we're piloting the Universal Health and Preparedness Review.
The WHO wants pathogens to be shipped to a biological laboratory hub in Switzerland.
And to facilitate greater sharing of pathogens and clinical samples, we're piloting the WHO BioHub system based at a secure facility in Switzerland.
However, neither the WHO nor the IPPPR addressed any of the following issues. They failed to recognize the benefits of preventative treatment with vitamins and minerals, such as vitamin D and zinc. They failed to recognize the benefits of repurposed essential medications, such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. They failed to address the deadly side effects of approved drugs, such as remdesivir and midazolam. They failed to understand the irony that they are actually requesting that the Secretary General of the WHO be given the legal authority to unilaterally declare an international pandemic without any peer review or democratic process, after they prevented the use of creative and effective treatments by frontline doctors because of the lack of peer-reviewed studies. The WHO and the IPPPR still seem to believe that ventilators saved lives. The WHO and the IPPPR still believe that the COVID-19 gene therapy bioweapons are safe and effective. They still seem to believe that equity in distributing poisonous drugs and deadly injections is more important than freedom of choice. They seem to be unaware that lockdowns and economic devastation caused an enormous mental health catastrophe. They still refuse to accept that pretending to determine cases via RT-PCR is not a valid way of diagnosing COVID-19. They seem to be in denial that the number of people who died with COVID-19 were fraudulently included in the overall death totals. They still seem to believe that early detection and not early treatment is the best way to prevent outbreaks from spreading into pandemics. And they still seem to believe that they know what is best for everyone, even after having been proved to be so horribly wrong for the past 2 years.
All right, that's great. That's a great video. That's got so much detail, and there's a lot of meat in there on that. That's incredible.
And so, essentially, she used the phrase framework convention.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, they telegraph, they tell you what they're doing, and then they distract you and all that sort of stuff. So love to spend some time actually talking about the latest version of the framework convention that most everybody calls the treaty.
Okay, that's just to let everybody understand when people are talking about the pandemic. Could you take just maybe a minute to explain what's happening in the news and why that's really sort of leading people in the wrong direction before we?
As a general rule, everything prior to that video, everything that we were talking about before was either about the amendments that were adopted last year, or the amendments that are pretty well hidden and they're being negotiated in secret that are shooting for next year. And so a lot of people have heard those horrible things that we talked about, changing the definition of a recommendation and dignity and rights and freedoms and the scope of everything, and so the Global Digital Health Certification Network to track and trace everybody. That's not in the treaty. That's in the amendments. And because people have been programmed, literally, to just say the word treaty, they mix it all up. And then the fact checkers say, well, that's misinformation. And technically, yes, it is. Because you're mixing this that belongs there with that belongs with the other thing. And so I have tried as much, and you've been great, today, every interview I do, it's like, okay, look, I'm not talking about the treaty, I'm talking about the amendments or vice versa. So now we're going to draw a little line and say, everything, actually the line was drawn before that video, that was all about their plans for what they called a framework convention. But then they started calling it everything else under the sun to hide the fact that they're building a frame that later on they can hang whatever they want on that frame. And so we did the pizza analogy. I'll do the Christmas tree analogy. If somebody said, hey, I'm going to bring a Christmas tree over and put it up in your house in December, can I decorate it? Most people were like, yeah, that'd be great. Go right ahead. Well, what if they decorate it with all kinds of horrible decorations? You didn't say, oh, no, wait a minute. You're more than happy to bring a tree over. That'd be great, but I get to approve it. And I get to approve how you decorate it. You don't normally think that way. And that's what they're counting on. And so what has happened since that video, which I think I did, last March, not this past March, but 2022, that was a year ago plus. And so, that's what's coming to fruition now. And so they created the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. They did not have a treaty in place at all, not even a rough draft, during last May's assembly. And so after the news got out that Biden's administration's amendments were rejected, I got a call from a friend of mine. He said, Jim, I saw you on Tucker Carlson. I was like, really? I don't remember being on Tucker Carlson. Okay. And this was last year, right? And so I said, what are you talking about? Oh, I saw you. I was like, okay, send me the link. So he sent me a link, and I watched the whole darn thing, and I was nowhere to be found. Right? I thought maybe they'd gotten a clip from something else that I did. I called him back. I was like, what in the world are you talking about? I watched the clip. I wasn't anywhere on there. And he goes, oh no, the topic, the treaty. And I'm like, what in the world are you talking about? And so what happened was last year, Tucker Carlson reported that, the treaty had gone down to defeat. I'm like, oh my God. And I've had experiences with the media, and I know that what's reported in the media is completely different than reality, yes. Right? And I can't tell you how many phone calls I got all summer that, the treaty had been defeated.
Have you actually gotten any calls recently about the coverage that Redacted did? Because they didn't get it right.
That was yesterday, right?
Yeah, it was like yesterday.
I haven't seen the one yesterday. I actually want, if you know how to get a hold of the folks at Redacted, one of the things that is on, well, this will be in the last section, one of the things that people can do is sign a petition to have a referendum so that the people in Portugal can say whether or not they like the treaty, the amendments, or they want to exit the WHO. And my understanding is the couple in Redacted who actually live in Portugal. And I really want to talk to them and put them in touch.
Well, let's put it out there now. Everybody watching this, just email Redacted. You go to their website.
Let's blow them up.
It's
just like what we did with
say, you know, if y'all live in Portugal, let's be at the forefront of raising the awareness of the people in Portugal and push the call for a referendum so that the will of the people in Portugal can be voiced.
Absolutely.
And we want to inform them.
Yeah, hit them up, guys, on redacted.inc. Go to the website. You can email them there. Go to the YouTube channel. Comments, just start flooding them.
There you go. And so obviously this is complicated and confusing, and anybody who watches this video is going to have the, you know, masterclass in what the heck is going on, right? And so through my train off the track, I'm trying to recall where I was and what I was headed for.
All right,
so they clearly said they wanted a framework convention.
There you go.
Okay, and they've called it by every other name, and Tucker Carlson last year just absolutely mangled it. And the first version of the quote-unquote treaty didn't show up until July. And it was just I think it was like a 19-page document. It really not a whole bunch of anything, but that's exactly what a framework is. It's like, well, what are the issues? What are the big things that we're talking about? You know, how do you do an outline when you're supposed to write a paper in school? You know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You just get your big items and you go, you know, we'll fill in the details later. You know, it's the Christmas tree that you hang the ornaments on. So from July to November, they developed their conceptual zero draft, and they let that out in November. They've had many more meetings since then, and they went from the conceptual zero draft in November to the zero draft in February. And then they got into a little bit of a very not so well hidden argument in their meeting in the beginning of April. And you could cut the tension with a knife. And essentially they came back, and the only agreement that they got to, because they were trying to get a first draft completed that could be presented at the assembly that just happened, and they failed miserably. What they ended up saying at the beginning of April was, all right, everybody calm down. All of the nations can submit text to be compiled into a new document that please submit it by April 22nd. And they promised to have a bureau's draft by May 22nd. And they went silent for that whole month. And then at that same roundtable where we played the Saudi Arabian co-chair talking about restricting rights during an emergency, later on in that roundtable, of all people, the Israeli delegate spoke up and said, you know, when are we going to get the new version of the proposed framework convention? Even the Israeli delegate hadn't received it. And so that evening, I asked some friends who, you know, spend a lot of time on Twitter. I said, look, you know, I know this thing was supposed to be made available today. The Israeli delegate said he hasn't found it. And the next day, you know, somebody had found it, and it had been published on the very same platform where I found the first document way back the year before. So it's not hacked or whistleblower or anything like that. You know, somebody published it in Geneva, and I republished it, and I was up until 4 in the morning doing an analysis of it. And I'll try to give a brief summary of what it is. But what I caution everybody to do is realize that there are 4 versions of what people call the treaty. So if you're dealing with the one from July or November or February, just throw it away. It's old news. The new one is 42 pages, and it's called the Bureau's text. And as a caveat, the last paragraph on the last page says, well, we got a whole lot more information that we're not revealing here. And there's actually a compilation document, which the rumor is that it's 208 pages long. And it actually tells you which nation made which suggestion. And that's really important. But that is not available in the currently available 42-page document. So I caution people before they read it to break it up into 3 sections and maybe 4. The first handful of pages are just sickeningly sweet propaganda, because they know that the average person is going to maybe try to read it. You'll start reading the first couple of pages. It talks about sovereignty and rights, and everybody should be healthy, and inclusivity and equity and all these wonderful things. And it sounds real good. And then you hit this hypnotically written text of the bulk of the proposal that repeats things over and over and over again. They have certain phrases that they just use over and over and over. And it's very hypnotizing. And you try to read it, and you just can't make sense of it, even though it's relatively very simple. So if somebody wants to try to read that document, I strongly encourage you to just take 1 paragraph at a time, read it, and then walk away from it. And think about what it is you think it means, and then come back and read it again, and imagine that you were of a totally different character. And you're like, how could I read into that something evil? Does it open up the door for someone to take that same language? Like the parables of Jesus. They say, well, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, you'll understand what they're actually doing. And so I'm actually impressed by the crafty linguistic skills that these people have to be able to write something that people will read, and a good-hearted person will read goodness into the document. But if you realize that someone else might be interpreting it and implementing it and have a totally different interpretation. So I'll try to give you a little bit of both. In the body of the document, primarily, I think it's a venture capital prospectus. I hope to actually interview some folks who are in the financial world, because the investment possibilities of having billions of dollars funneled into the brandy new industry of pandemic response products is going to be very, very profitable for the people who know who to call to get the contracts that are going to come out to set up the laboratory networks that are going to implement the One Health approach, which involves looking under every rock and every bat cave and every sewage treatment plant and up everybody's nose and at your veterinarian's office and your dog and your cat and your chickens and your goats and your cows and everything else under the sun, to use the swab that they stuck up everybody's nose to pretend to find pathogens with pandemic potential. That's the term that they use in the definitions. Yeah. They don't define it. Now, how would I define a pathogen with pandemic potential? It's the potential for profit from the products that can be manufactured if you've cobbled together a whole bunch of genetic sequences and you've got the laboratory and the computer systems and the personnel to go, oh, look, we found a new pathogen or a new variant of a pathogen. let's send it to Geneva and then send it off to the companies to make some sort of drug or injection that they could then send back to the nations where that was, draw a couple of miles circle around wherever they found it, and say, oh, we have this system that works really, really well. Everybody here's got to get jabbed, and that'll stop that pathogen swamp monster from, coming out of the sewage treatment plant and infecting everybody in that location. This is a business opportunity. And I got the clue back in November. Yeah. Actually, I got the clue when I did that article where you got the video. Back in September of 2021, Kamala Harris presented the Biden administration's proposal to create what they call a financial intermediary fund. And they pledged $750 million into this fund. And a year went by, they worked it all out, and in November of 2022, they announced, changed the name a little bit, and they call it the World Bank Operated Pandemic Fund. And the Indonesian health minister in Bali in 2020, in November, was talking to all of the business people who attended. And he said, look, we've got this beautiful new pandemic fund that we're hoping to get up to $10 billion a year, and go invest. It's a wonderful business opportunity. And so if you just take a step back and think about it, what did they actually do to trick most everybody over the past 4 years? They said, oh, we got this new test. We can stick it up your nose, and even though you don't have symptoms, we can determine whether or not you're a case.
Don't you think that test was probably where most of the money was made? Right off the bat. I mean, they were...
I don't know that that's where most of the money was made. Most of the money was made, we can talk about that, that's a whole nother story. In the CARES Act, so much money went to hospitals, to do what they did to people.
To diagnose, to get the label.
In the sense of what you're saying is, if you get the diagnosis, you get a 20% bonus on everything that you do, and then you have this regulatory cover to use things that are very costly. Run Death is Near and ventilators, huge expense, when you could have spent a couple of bucks on a couple of pills and give somebody some vitamin C, and no money would be made, but people would be healthy. You could really do some damage to both the person's health and their financial picture if you do the things that we're authorized to do. And so you're right in the sense that the test, we'll give you a free test so that we can make money on the back end. Yeah. Right. And so what they are setting up is a situation where the nations that are relatively poor don't necessarily have a genomic sequencing laboratory, on every street corner. And so in Europe and in North America and the UK and other quote unquote developed nations, they were able to pay for, finance, and, print money to just put test kits out all over the place. Every street corner, there's literally, an easy up pop-up, come get your test, free test. Because it fueled the beast of the industry. Now with the case numbers really reflected the number of tests. Because as Kerry Mullen said, if you run the PCR through enough cycles, you can find anything you want anywhere.
That was the big deal early in 2020 when this was first happening. It was going out. That was in the news, that just jack the cycles up until you get what you need.
and the more tests you can buy, the more cases you can create. And so the capability to do that in the nations that had the money and the infrastructure to do that, honestly, it worked on most people. And so people were forced, you can't go to work, you can't go shopping, you got whatever it was, you can't do these events. You either have, later on, you had to have the jab or something stuck up your nose. So that capability, those laboratories aren't developed in the middle of the Sahara Desert or the Kalahari or, in nations around the world, small island nations in the Pacific or the Caribbean. And so they don't have that type of, I will say, fraudulent infrastructure. And so the test case was America and Europe, and maybe Australia and New Zealand. And so they figured out that, yes, you could scare the daylights out of people if you stick a test kit somewhere and you go, oh, we found polio in the New York sewage system, right? We find monkeypox, in the Netherlands.
You know what's funny about that, James? Whenever they go looking for any kind of, they always find something. They went to, years ago, they went to a pig farm in Mexico looking for viruses, and guess what they found? They found a swine flu.
Do you think it's possible to go into a chicken coop and find some bird flu?
This is how they operate.
How about you go into a bat cave and check the guano? I bet you're going to find some kind of bat-related coronavirus, okay? And people don't understand the sequencing and how they cobble all of this together. They put it into a computer. They make it sound really good. They say they found this intact sequence of this new virus, and it's just all hogwash. And they'll probably test the hogwash and find some swine flu.
Right.
And so what they are doing with this framework convention, with the body of it, is they are essentially, it's a venture capital prospectus. We're going to have every nation promise to build that kind of infrastructure so they can pull a fake public health emergency of international concern, PHEIC, fake, but have built out another fake, the pharmaceutical hospital emergency industrial complex, to just continue to fearmonger. And one of the things that the Saudi Arabian co-chair said is there's gonna be another pandemic.
Yes, how about that?
Okay, and so the body of what is in the quote unquote treaty or framework convention, I would love it if anyone here, I normally do this at the end of the video, but I'm going to give everybody my phone number right now because I'm thinking about it. I live in the US, and you can call me or text me, or if you're outside the country, use Signal or Telegram or WhatsApp and put a +1 for the United States country code. And my phone number is 310-619-3055. Anybody can call me, but specifically if you have skills and are familiar with the financial world, I want people who can look at this document as if it was, we're looking for venture capital. We want to invest in these industries. Somebody could make good investments, and I'm not advocating it, but if you knew what they were planning on building out with these billions of dollars, and you were somebody in position to be on the receiving end to make all of these pandemic response products, including personal protective equipment, masks and gowns and all that sort of stuff. This is a growth industry as far as they're concerned for the next couple of decades.
Yeah.
That's what this is. It's not about your health. And it just isn't. They aren't interviewing doctors. They aren't trying to figure how in the world could you instantaneously have the director general determine what pandemic response products are needed at the beginning of an outbreak of an unknown brandy new pathogen. I mean, it's so absurd, it's laughable, but yet, people don't question it. But what I really want to talk about are two things, Article 18 and then Chapter 3 of the treaty / Framework Convention. Article 18, I wrote a whole separate article on it. I did a half-hour segment with David Knight, who was actually the very first person who ever gave me a platform to talk about this last year.
InfoWars, is that David Knight? It used to be.
Formerly, had a little falling out.
Yeah.
And so we had some fun with it because Article 18 is about communication and, public awareness or whatever the heck their title is. It's about censorship. The first phrase is that you have to strengthen science. And my bad joke is, does that mean we've got to go work out with, Tony Fauci?
Right.
How do you strengthen science other than allow open discourse? And so it goes on to say a whole bunch of things. literally in an international agreement, it says that they want the WHO to tackle mis and disinformation. What does that mean? Well, the gist of it is, and on that page, there is a list of, I think at the moment, 635 alternative media outlets. And so if there's an alternative media outlet that is not jumping up and down, ranting and raving, screaming that Article 18 must not be allowed to even be considered, then they're not worth paying attention to, because they're coming for those people. They're coming for your business. You better speak up about it. Your silence is your consent. They want the WHO to be in charge of all that is true in medical science.
They're trying to reframe reality, basically.
You know, and so that is, you know, a direct request from me to everyone on that list. If anyone watching here reads the article on my Substack about censorship, there's 600 people that you could call. And if you really want to have an impact and you realize the concept of a force multiplier, what if you call Redacted, or what if you call whomever else is on the list and say, hey, you guys really need to cover this. And, you know, maybe they have an audience of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 people, whatever it might be. Your one outreach to any of those media outlets could expand exponentially. You might send a couple of emails, make a couple of phone calls, fill out a couple of contact forms, and say, hey, you guys need to watch this video, this one that we're in right now. Send the link to this and go, look, I know it's 3 hours long, but it's all there. This is all the information. Then you'll know what's going on, and you darn well better be screaming and yelling about the censorship, Article 18, in the Bureau's text. Because if you're not yelling about that, what are you doing? Okay, so moving on to what I think is actually probably the most important thing is the Chapter 3 in the Framework Convention. And what that does is very similar, but even worse than what happened back in 1948. It sets up a structure where, forget about what's in the body of the treaty, who's going to implement and oversee it? Are you going to be in charge of making sure that they do everything that they said they were going to do? Well, what they would set up is called a conference of the parties. Any of the nations who were members of or wanted to sign on to the treaty would have a delegate that's a member of the conference of the parties. They would allow to participate in that all of the many stakeholders, the relevant stakeholders, of which there's a list of 400 organizations, topped off by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Gavi Vaccine Alliance and so forth and so on. Those are the people who would set up 3 committees and a panel of experts to oversee the implementation of whatever's in the Framework Convention. And Article 34 is the scary part. It would enable them to agree to protocols that we would not be able to reject. And that's why the analogy of somebody gives you a Christmas tree and they come and decorate it for you. If this treaty, as it is written, were to be adopted, it would shift authority from every nation on the planet to the Conference of the Parties, the COP. So I wrote an article entitled Stop the COP. And it's basically Chapter 3 of the proposed draft. That is the last thing in the world any nation on the planet should even consider doing. But that's what they did with climate change. Have you heard of COP27?
Oh, yeah.
And COP28? They set it up 27, 28 years ago, where these people who are given authority to make decisions going forward, the creep of what they do, right? Oh, well, everybody's got to do this and everybody's got to do this. And then suddenly you look at, why is all of this insane activity happening in each and every government around the world? Because they're obligated to do so, because they abdicated the power to make the decisions and gave it to the conference of the parties. And so if you read nothing else, read chapter 3 of the draft and recognize that for the protocols, if they decide to change the rules, it's their decision. You gave them the authority if you were to allow this to go into effect. And so
James has got that on his here on his Substack too, guys. It's at the top. Stop the Cop. It's about 3 articles down now, and you can read this for yourself. Just what the text actually says, what he's just talked about. Chapter 3, Article 20, 21, 22 are there.
And so the passing on of the authority back in 1948, where instead of Congress maintaining control, they told the president, oh, you can handle that, right? That abdication of responsibility goes hand in hand with the abdication of the authority. So I've always said, if you want to make me responsible for something, you got to give me the authority to do it. If you want me to be responsible for something, but I don't have the authority to make it happen, forget about it. And so what's happening here is they want to have the authority passed over, but they've got diplomatic immunity. They don't have any responsibility. You can't touch them. They get the authority without the responsibility, and that's why we're having all these problems. Who's actually responsible? Oh, it's not my job. I'm just following orders. Well, you follow orders all the way up to the WHO. They've got diplomatic immunity.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know that ever really occurred to me that way, because typically, even in when we had the after World War II and the Nazi officers were brought forward to be tried, they were responsible for their actions. They certainly didn't have diplomatic immunity, did they? So this is a new, we're seeing a kind of a new sort of beast.
Oh, it's a beast, all right. And so, then everybody else falls into a certain couple of categories. We'll close the topic and just summarize it, that there's the amendments that were adopted last year. There's the amendments, 307 of them, that are quietly being negotiated right now. Those don't need any signature or vote by Congress or Parliament. They need to be stopped immediately. They cannot be allowed to get to the point where they're even considering adopting them, because only the leader of the nation can reject them. We have to make sure that those things stop immediately, as well as the treaty. But the treaty potentially could be immediately put into effect because of Article 38, where on a provisional basis, the treaty could be put into effect right away, even before anybody signs it, or I take that back. They would have to agree to sign it, but there would be no Senate or parliamentary review of the treaty. It can go right into provisional effect. It needs to be stopped now, because they haven't even considered what the hell they're doing. Why are they restructuring the economy? It's a business venture capital prospectus. This is just enormous money laundering, crony capitalism, public-private partnership, which is essentially fascism. Yeah, it's government and private industry working together to take advantage of the people. It has to be stopped.
There's a document. It may have come from one of the gentlemen you mentioned earlier. We saw this a few days ago, and it comes from Ian Davis ultimately, and it describes here. We've got this available. It's available on the website, Summer.
We haven't put up there yet.
All right, we'll put this up there, because what James is describing now, if you see this document, you can see how the
power structure.
Yeah, you can see the structure of it, where you've got the World Economic Forum, like you go back in time, the Club of Rome, Rockefellers, and then you've got the policy distributors, and that's where you got the.
I'm familiar with the document that you're talking about.
Okay, all right.
I can condense that down into a much more easy to document. Not with just graphic structure, but if you read chapter 3, it very simply says they're creating a new bureaucracy, the Conference of the Parties, and giving them the authority to oversee what's going on here. So within the WHO, they're talking about creating another committee. It's like the Russian Perestroika nesting dolls, right? We got a bureaucracy inside a bureaucracy inside a bureaucracy. You can't touch it. And when you get down into the middle of it, it's all got diplomatic immunity. You can't, what do you do? Okay, well, what you do is you say, no, we're not having anything to do with anything about that, regardless of what the content of the treaty is. And so you can simplify this whole thing, and maybe we'll now move into the final section of what do you do? How do you stop this craziness?
So first of all, when we think about what we're stopping, first of all, immediately what immediately has to be done, we have to address the amendments to the IHR. Is that right?
Well, actually, what the ultimate solution is, and I don't mean that in the way, I'll take the ultimate solution back to the final solution. I'm not going there. A path to a better place is to realize that in any organization, the rules only apply to the members. If you're not a member of the organization, they can have all the rules they want. Doesn't apply to you. And so the problem started in 1948. So I'm an advocate that we should exit the WHO, and we're already 10% of the way there. You can go to exitthewho.com, and I'd encourage you, if you want to show that one, exitthewho.com. There's a lot of information at the top so that people can see the details of the legislation that was proposed by Andy Biggs from Arizona. It's really simple, and if you can find the box that says HR 79, it's only 3 or so paragraphs. We can read it and understand it, anybody, in a couple of minutes. The first step is to give them notice that we're leaving. The second step is to stop giving them money. Give them the money that we owe them, because that's part of the original agreement. We agree to pay whatever we've promised to pay.
Is this HR 79? Is that what that is?
HR 79.
Okay.
If you're on exitthewho.com, you should see a blue top image.
Okay. Well, that's the graphic.
And if you scroll down a little bit, there's a box that just says HR 79, and it pretty much fits on the screen. It's pretty much a one-pager. I can't see the screen that you're looking at, but if you're on,
I'll get it up there.
If you're on exitthewho.com and you scroll down a little bit till you see a big old HR 79, it's very simple. Tell them we're leaving, give them the money we owe them, and revoke the legislation that got us into this mess in the first place. And so far, we've gotten about 10% of Congress on board. Last time I checked, there were 45, one sponsor and 44 co-sponsors.
There we go.
We have a lot of work to do, but if you scroll down that page, you'll find that I've already done a lot of work for people. There's a big red take action sign, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 things that you can do very easily. You hit a button, put your contact information in, and hit another couple of buttons and send an email to each and every member of Congress with one fell swoop. Or you can target the representatives that you send it to, or you can send it to the committee that's holding it up. Or you can take the sample template email and send that to Congress and change it however you want to change it. But if you keep going down, you'll see, and this is where I recommend people start, because it's actually a place where you can lead with love in your heart. If you scroll down until you see a couple of Congress people who have a green box near their name, a green rectangle, there's 45 members of Congress who have already done something good. They've co-sponsored this legislation. They put their name on the line that they think we should exit the WHO. And my advice to everybody is give them a phone call. Now, they have multiple offices, they have local offices, and whether or not you live in their district doesn't matter. Call all of them on the list. And when they answer the phone, say, you know what, I'm just calling to say thank you. The you're going to get a staff member, you're not likely to get the congressperson. Just say, you know, the congressperson that you work for, I understand that they're a co-sponsor or the sponsor of HR 79. Please tell them I said thank you. I'm here to support you. You're doing what I want you to do. Thank you very much. How can I help? And they're gonna be like, boy, we don't get too many of these phone calls, right? But you're gonna make their day. And you can lead with that love in your heart. But then you can say, well, what are you guys doing to get other Congress people to sign on to this? Are you going on TV talking about it? Could you do that? Could you maybe talk to the senator from your state and find out if they would be willing to do a companion legislation in the Senate? Because the Senate's asleep on this right now.
Yeah.
So start with the low-hanging fruit. Start with something that could and should be. I did one of those phone calls at 7 o'clock this morning. Person got me connected to a staff member for a congressperson in Florida. We had a wonderful conversation. The congressperson's already a sponsor. So I called up and I said, hey, thank you. Thank you very much.
Do you know about Chris Smith in
yes.
New Jersey?
Yes, exactly. He's hopefully doing some investigating into all of this.
Okay,
and so you could do it the hard way if you want. You can call up some people who are pro-globalists and beat your head against a brick wall and try to argue with them about this. But I strongly suggest starting with the low-hanging fruit and the allies that we already have. We already got 10%. We only need a little bit over 50, right? And so call them up and say thank you. And call up their local offices. You're going to get different staff members at different offices. You're going to make their day, but you're also going to give them something that they can do. So you're increasing the action in our allies. Talk to one of their staff members and say, could you ask the congressperson to talk to the senator? Why don't they have a companion legislation in the Senate? So there's the challenge for you. Who can get a senator to make this happen first, right? I've had this conversation with people in a couple of different states. I can't do all 50 by myself. I'm trying. That's a fun, loving conversation that could actually get something accomplished. Now, I am not naive, and I understand that what we're dealing with is we should be able to get this in the House. It's probably not going to happen in the Senate, but if there's a groundswell of public awareness that we're this close, we've got 18 months in front of us of campaigning. There's people running for president. There's people going to be running for every office you can imagine. It's a very simple question. Did you support HR 79 or not? Do you want to stay in the WHO or not? It's going to influence my vote. What say you? Now, there's one last thing. I'll wrap it up. There's an enormous amount of information that I can pass on. In the short run, right now, if you could go to silenceequalsconsent.com. You don't put the equal sign and don't do a search for it. Just go there. Silenceequalsconsent.com. Somehow, the Lord is shining upon us, and the Office of Global Affairs, which is built into the Health and Human Services Department, if you scroll down until you hit a bunch of text, they're having 2 separate listening sessions. Most people would call it a public comment period in June.
Here it is. The email you received?
Yes.
Yeah.
And a little bit down below that, I dug these out of the Federal Register, and they've, publicly told us by posting this in the Federal Register that if you send an email in as instructed, they're taking applications for speaking slots, and you can speak directly to the office where our delegates receive their checks. The Office of Global Affairs, a good portion of the delegation are the delegates to the WHO. And a good friend of mine, Dustin from Interest of Justice, about 3-4 weeks ago, found out about a previous listening session. And there's an article that I have about that one. And he got to speak directly to 2 of the main delegates, and he just absolutely let it rip.
Mm-hmm.
He told them exactly what he felt. I was able to record it, and I have it up on on a different article. And so if you want to speak directly to your delegates, they have set up 2 listening sessions in June. The first deadline for the first session is June 9th. So tell everybody you know, okay? There's also the capability to just send them your written comment if you don't want to get involved in audio-visual, speaking for a couple of minutes to the people. You can send in your written comment. And so to end it on just a myriad of things that you can do, if you go to my main Substack, the pinned article is worldwide.exitthewho.com. And so I've been working on this for a year, and there are people all around the world. In Australia, you should see a whole bunch of maps if you're on the right page. Australia, Canada,
There we go.
Finland, Israel, on down the road, right? Different people in different countries doing different things. Petitions, referendums. The simplest thing is if you have a group set up in any social media group or Telegram or Signal or WhatsApp. The step number 1 is if somebody wants to volunteer, how do you get them connected into what you're doing? So if anybody wants to get rolling on this and you want to start a group that other people can join so that like-minded people can work together, maybe you want to start a group in your state. If you're in another country, maybe you want to start a group in that country. Just let me know and I'll add a flag and I'll add it to the list. And so people around the world are aware of this, and it's exploding because of the awareness that is growing. We want to make sure people are clear on the details. I don't know how much more I can do than what we've just done here. So as soon as you get this video done, I'll post it up. If you want to have fun with it, and especially with your congressperson, if you go back to the archive and go down to about 2 weeks ago, everybody says, "Oh, Jim, this is all so complicated. Could you make it easier?" So one of the articles a few weeks back is the international health regulations for kids.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
I made a 2-page flyer for children. And you should be able to understand it. I think I did it at about a 5th grade level. But before anybody gets triggered, please don't bother your children with this. Let them just enjoy their childhood. I did this so you could hand it to your congressperson. Because, they should be able to comprehend this. I dumbed it down to maybe a 5th grade level. If a person can read, they should be able to understand this brief summary of what's going on.
What date was that one? I want to find that one.
It's I don't know what date it was. I don't see it in front of me right now. But if you're in the archive and you just scroll down, it's the International Health Regulations for Kids. It's got a bluish look to it, and it's maybe about 2 weeks ago or so.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I get it.
If your congressperson can't understand that, well, maybe you need to vote for a new congressperson, right? But have some fun with it, and don't bother your children with it. But I bet there's some people who have kids who would read that and go, well, that doesn't sound very good. I don't think I would like that. And so if you can explain it to a school kid, maybe you got a chance with your congressperson. Okay. And so last but not least, I think if you just want to have some fun with it, and if anybody is offended by this, I apologize, but too bad. Toughen up a little bit. Do you think you can remember 3 words? A lot of information, but could you remember 3 words? Can I get an affirmative?
Yes, I could think. We could remember 3 words.
We can remember.
I was waiting with bated breath for that.
Well, I was asking a question. I mean, have some fun with it. If you're out with your friends and just shooting the breeze, hey, I got a test for you. Can you remember 3 words? Okay. First word is stop. Second word is screw. Third word is exit. Stop, screw, and exit. I've built out stopthewho.com with all of the information and the evidence. I've written a Cliff Notes version. I've done all kinds of things. There's a movie. It's translated into 18 different languages. If you want to know what's going on, go to stopthewho.com. If you want to see what other people have had to say, please do pay a visit to screwthewho.com. My favorite video is the second one down. I got to give Jimmy in Ecuador all the credit. The second video down, don't let it dissuade you from making your own video. He set the bar really high, all right? But everybody on that list has learned what's going on, and they've recorded a short video expressing their opinion. And here's what I encourage everybody to do. Go to stopthewho.com and listen to what we've heard. Write down whatever it is your opinion is. Write a script for yourself, whatever it is you want to say. And then take that script and hide it from yourself, and get your camera or whatever you may use, your phone, your computer, however you might be able to record yourself, and then just do a freewheeling rant. Just let it loose. Just say whatever it is you want to say, record it, and then transcribe your own words. And then compare what you wrote to what you said, and merge the two together, and then record it again. Because when you speak, freely, you have a different way of putting words out than when you write. It's a different part of the brain. And so say what you want to say, record what you want to say, write that down, transcribe it. You might be able to find some online software that'll do it for you. And now you've got a document that's what your opinion is. And then go to screwthewho.com and watch what other people had to say. And you may very well go, oh, I didn't ever think of that. Or, oh, I like how he said that, or how she said that. And then, take notes. And then put it all in a document, and you can send that to your congressperson. Or you could record it, post it up on the internet, be the media. Maybe your video is the one that goes viral and wakes everybody up. But then you can take your video link and send your video and the transcript of your video to your congressperson or whomever you want to send it to. And so exit the who we already talked about. If you want to take action and send information to Congress and get them to support the exit the who legislation. So stop, screw, and exit. Screwthewho.com is just regular people around the world expressing their opinion. Because if you don't do that, your silence is considered to be consent. And if you like what they're doing and you think Tedros should be everybody's doctor and be in control of the world, and you want billions of dollars to go into, implementing the One Health approach where they're looking at animals and nature and trying to find pathogens to scare you with, if you're all down with that and that's cool to you, maybe you're going to invest in that industry. And, pandemics do appear to be very profitable. But if that's not something if that's not the world you want to live in, then give me a phone call, 310-619-3055.
There we go. I've got your number up on there. Now, Jim, I was thinking about this, or James, I'm sorry, from last night.
Oh, Jim's good.
Okay.
You can call me Jim.
All right. I feel like I know you pretty well now after 3 hours. So possible outcomes for this thing, just quickly, I was just jotting these down with Summer yesterday. There could be an internal now, first of all, we have to act, but I'm just as a way of brainstorming here. There could be an internal failure, which would be they got what they wanted, but it just broke under its own weight. Or there could be member states who object, or maybe there's not enough connection with the technology yet to make it happen. Or there could be an external failure, which would be a withdrawal from the WHO. It's not likely they're going to have an internal failure of given all the time they've had to work on this. So an external failure, that would be us. It would be either we withdraw from the WHO or Jesus returns. And so we were thinking about this. If Summer found an article the other day, it seems like they've even thought ahead so far that if it was to happen and go through, that there would be a group of people called the discontents, like a breakaway civilization. The article says, do you want to talk about it? Some of those, it says those we lost along the way.
Yeah.
And they just kind of frame it in a way that...
It was a piece that the World Economic Forum put out, I believe it was in 2017 or 2015. So it's, their classic. They like to imagine the future and act as if it's already happening. And they're already anticipating that there would be a breakaway culture, society that would be living called the discontents. And they pretend to be that they're so disappointed that we didn't decide to come on board and adopt the technologies, thus.
How lucky we are, right?
Mm.
Well, it's kind of like the idea of therapeutic totalitarianism or communitarianism, where it's like they're not going to take your guns away from you, but if you're going to survive and you're going to live in our smart city, you'll have to leave all that at the door. But it looks like they've even thought about the possibility of people who just won't be a part of it somehow. I don't know. I just thought that was interesting. That was a 2016 article written by the World Economic Forum for Forbes magazine, and we don't want to see that happen.
But when they always
anyway.
say no one left behind, and every single thing that they're writing in their documents is, equity for all, and this is for all, I don't really get the impression that they would deliver on that and be okay with there being a breakaway society. But that's just my take.
What do you see as we wrap it up? What are the have we missed anything there when you think about possible outcomes? What else could happen?
I don't even remotely pretend to be a Bible scholar. Okay, that is not my area of expertise. I've read as much as I can and I remember as much as I can. But there's all kinds of prophecies around a time of deception. And so the way I got into this is I volunteered to do whatever came. And when I wake up in the morning and my eyes open and I'm laying in bed, I pay attention to the ideas that come through my mind. And those ideas are not polluted by social media or television because I don't partake, right? The ideas that come from somewhere, okay? And there will be an idea that pops up that's like, oh, I could work on that. I could focus on doing that. That's something that I agree with and it feels right. It feels that that's appropriate, something I could do, whatever that may be. And the effort goes into doing that. And so it really boils down to if you believe that we're in a time of great deception and you're going to be given the opportunity to choose the path of convenient obedience to their beast-like system, or you're going to trust what your God speaks to you in your heart, however you define that. Just be true to yourself, and it'll all be okay, because you'll be putting your blessings and your gifts up in heaven. And, if you trust that I really don't like it when people, especially in the United States, or you see it in Israel or other countries, oh, God is on our side. No, you want to be on God's side. And so if you wake up every morning and you go, God, what do you want me to do? And you accept whatever that direction is, make sure you're listening to the right voice, because you might have a demon on one shoulder and an angel on the other. So, if you're doing things that are evil because somebody told you, you might want to check yourself and watch out for what you're doing. But I see this whole thing as a character test. And I'm just trying to be the best man I can be, do whatever I can. If I go to sleep at the end of the night and I'm exhausted, but I look back and I go, I gave it my best. That's all you can do. Nobody asks, anymore. God never asks you to do something you can't do.
Well, you are
right?
an answer to a prayer of mine, because we've been working really diligently on this for a while now, and I just, bam, you showed up, and hey, give me a call, and we called, and here you are. So thank you so much for your hard work and dedication.
I got some inspiration a number of years ago, and it essentially said, you do you. Do the best you can at being you, and allow everyone else to be who they are. And some force will bring people together that are meant to be together at that moment. And we're all headed basically, I think, in the same direction. But, you're going to go down that path and I'll go down this path. And as long as we're all headed in towards a good world, when the paths cross, you work together, and then you go work with somebody else, and you go work with somebody else, and you come back, oh, look at what they did. And, all over the world, the connections are happening. So what I see is not a parallel universe, but an interconnected group of people who want to work together. And if you're, talking to somebody who's your neighbor or halfway around the world, it's people who come together somehow divinely connected, who want to work on a little something, and they create something that's inspired from somewhere beyond just your mind. And you put it out there, somebody sees that, and it grows in a way that I cannot fathom. I could not have even remotely imagined being where I am right now in the middle of all of this, issues about the WHO. I just trust every morning when I wake up, it's like, what can I do? And when somebody says, what can I do? My general question back at him is, I got a lot of things, that I've set up that people can do, but what does your heart tell you to do? That's what you should do. Don't do what I'm doing. I got that covered. I'm busy being me. I don't need anybody to try to be me. Although people have put up fake stuff about me on Telegram. There's a group on Telegram. If you're looking for me on Telegram, I don't know who that guy is, but it's not me.
Okay, noted.
It looks like me, but just call me and we'll get it connected. And so it's actually really simple, right? What do you think is good and righteous and appropriate to do? Put that energy out into the universe. It'll attract people who agree with you. I guess the only advice I would say to people is share the information freely. Find some little something that you can share with people and share it with everybody. And there's a saying that a lot of people use, but I've put an addendum on it. Absolutely, in terms of the WHO, the devil is in the details. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But I've put an addendum on that saying, the angels bring awareness. And so whatever piece of this complicated puzzle you think is, good enough to share with the next person, be an angel. Take that and share it with them. Give them the opportunity to raise their awareness about what's going on. It's not for you to command them to learn or change their mind, but you bring a little tiny bit of information, and if they're ready for it, if it's their path to, at that moment, wake up and go, what the heck is this, right? If they're not ready, and that's not what their guidance tells them to do, bless them on their way and try to raise the awareness of somebody else. And I just work with the willing. You get much more done. I don't know where this video is going to go, but this is the most appropriate and effective use of these 3 hours, because somebody's going to take this and maybe you guys are going to chop it up and there'll be a little snippet here and a little snippet there, and somebody will say, oh, here's a little teaser, a little trailer. You got to watch the whole thing. And if a person doesn't care and they're not ready, how many trailers have you watched and you didn't watch the movie? Okay. And unfortunately, most of the trailers are like way better than the movie. All the good stuff is in the trailer. It's like, okay, there's 3 minutes of good stuff in the movie. I don't need to watch it. All the good stuff has already been out there. But, there's people doing artwork and music and everything under the sun, protests and, signs and flyers and videos and websites and petitions. You do you, okay? Just don't sit on your butt and think that that's really going to get anything done, because it isn't. Unless you spend that whole time praying and envisioning what it is you want. There are, even somebody who is at a place where they have no money, they have no mobility, they have no connections, you can still have an impact. So control your thoughts, control your actions, be responsible for yourself, and take one step at a time every day. And we're going to get to a better world, but no one person can do it. We've all got to come together, because what is life, if you're all by yourself? It's lonely. You want to work with as many people as you possibly can and set the course for the world that you want to live in the future.
Ultimately, the power of evil is limited and weak, because we do live in God's universe, and according to the theology that's found in the Bible, that God is sovereign over everything. So what we see happening right now is not happening because God lost control. There is a judgment that's come down on people now, just for what we've already said, for being passive, for not living out the faith, as James says in his epistle. But we can't give the WHO, the United Nations, and these people, they're not sovereign. They're trying to be. They're trying to take that power, but they're not sovereign. And if you get, it's ultimately all going to be in vain, but we're not called to sit and watch it happen. We're called to action. Some of God's greatest victories came when it looked like all was lost. If you could think of one, that would be the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The Roman Empire thought they had put down this revolution. The disciples ran for the hills. Everybody was confused. It would look like it was all over. But then from that, upon the resurrection, from that point forward, the church was established. And it wasn't established because people sat at home and watched it be established. And so eventually the put down of a whole empire, which is much like what we're going up against today. It's a lot like that Roman Empire. On chapter 2 of Daniel reminds everyone, as he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar, the God of heaven is the one who changes times and seasons, and he sets up kings, and he brings them down. And so that's what we want to leave you with today. James, thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to getting back with you again sometime soon, and maybe we can go into more detail on some specific points about this, but we really do appreciate you. Summer, let him know how much we appreciate.
Yeah, we're very, very grateful.
The honor is mine. It's everybody lives in a soundbite world.
Yeah.
And yes, I can condense this into a 2-page flyer for kids, but it's deception, almost to infinity. And so I don't expect everyone to know all of this. I've been studying this for a year, but 14, 15 months ago, I didn't know any of this. Absolutely nothing. I had no idea. And so you don't need to know everything. You just need to realize that there's an issue going on that they would love to have happen in silence, invisible, in hiding. And, what are we doing other than shining light on the darkness?
Exactly.
And take a look at it, see what it is, make your own judgment as to what you think it is and what you think you should do about it. And I trust that everyone will be guided to do what's best for them. And that'll end up being what's best for everybody.
Yeah, we're just so grateful that that you picked up the call that day and that you really were ready to do a deep dive with us. And we just pray that this message goes far and wide. Please, everybody, share this information. Share it. Forward it. Get it out there. Give it just a like. Just listen to it again. It's a lot of information to get acquainted with, but I really do believe it's a good time not to be black-pilled, as they say, where you're just going, oh, well, I can't do anything about it. So what we're really hoping and praying to bring to you today is that you guys can pray about it and come into action and make a stand, because so much is at stake. I mean, if we don't make a stand now about this issue, well, like you said, silence is consent. So.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely an appropriate use of time, and we appreciate you being here with us.
Anytime somebody says they can't do something, it really means they just won't.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. Can't do it, then you see them doing it. It's like, well, what were you really trying to say? And so everybody can do what their heart guides them to do, and everyone is where they are, and they have a life that they have to, manage. And so people do whatever they're able to do. You can do the smallest thing, and it can have an impact that grows exponentially. I'm sure there's a biblical passage about some mustard seeds. It's infinite in how it can grow. You just got to get that little tiny start, and then maybe you touch somebody and it spreads, and you never know how it goes all the way around. And I have faith that we're headed for a better world. Nobody said it was going to be easy. The journey might be difficult, but just take that first step.
Yes.
We don't expect it to be easy, and it's ultimately it's not us. That little mustard seed of faith that means that when we're walking with Christ, we have the power of Him with us. And thanks James, for being with us. We look forward to talking to you again. We'll see you.
My pleasure.
See you very soon. Thanks.
God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.